All right, all right. We are live. Ladies and gentlemen, this evening I just finished working here at the house and a video came out by Bart Ehrman. It's not often that I do a reaction or review of Bart Ehrman's material, specifically from his YouTube channel, but I watched it and I said, wow, this was really succinct. This was very clear. And I wanted to go over the material with you, react to it with you, but also I think he nails something most people miss. He's done several debates with people like Mike Lacona. I don't know if him and Gary Habermas ever debated, but I know Mike Lacona thinks that you can historically prove the resurrection, or at least really show why it's the case. And I'm not obviously somebody persuaded of that. So I wanted to go over this interview that Megan Lewis did with Bart Ehrman and maybe add my own 2 cents along the way of what Bart's saying. And I know Bart could probably say much more, but there was a lot of good stuff there. He titled his video, let me pull it up. He titled the video, Why No One Can Prove the Resurrection. If you're not subscribed to Bart Ehrman's YouTube channel, obviously you've been living in a cave, under a rock, on a different planet, whatever it might be. But make sure you go and you subscribe and you like and you comment and let them know MythVision sent you. Just to let him know, keep us in good favor and let him know, hey, MythVision's doing something over there. It's bringing attention. That's always useful when content creators are doing this. So without further ado, everybody, welcome in the chat. Good to see you here. AP, good to see you, brother. Good to see you, Baron. Good to see you, Paul. Good to see you here. Typo in the title. I fixed it, I believe, but good catch. Thank you. I am a fan of Bart Ehrman. I think he has a lot of good insights. I might be a bit more skeptical at times, probably because I don't know things that he knows about some stuff. It also could be that I've just been reading scholars who have different views about certain things when you get down into the details than he does in terms of how far one can push this material historically, factually. Like what can we trust that goes back, right? And so I can play into all the sandboxes and have fun. You might hear me do a little bit of that today, but again, thank you for being here. Make sure you like the video. If you're a fan of what Bart Ehrman does or critical scholarship at all, you're in the right place. This is where we're at. If you're new, I hope you stay. I hope you continue to be here, drop comments, hang out, ask questions, comments, whatever. Harass the heck out of me. I don't care. We're about to start reviewing, and I'm thankful that you're all here. Now, let me get some water because it's hot in Florida, and I'm just catching up, a little bit dehydrated. Okay. Good to see you, Bakken. Good to see you, brother. Let's get the party started. Excellent interview, by the way. I've linked the original in the description.
The resurrection of Jesus is probably one of the most well-known stories from the New Testament, but how do historians deal with this miraculous event? Should it be discounted in its entirety, or can it be investigated using the historical method? Today, we're talking about what historians can and can't say about the resurrection. We also have our bonus segment at the end, which this week is Outsmart Bart, where questions from our listeners test the limits of Bart's biblical knowledge. Welcome to the Misquoting Jesus podcast with Bart Ehrman. Bart, before we get into the scholarly response for what historians can say about the resurrection, how did your evangelical background shape the way you first thought about historical evidence for the resurrection?
Well, when I was an evangelical, I was very much in the apologetic mode. I thought that you could demonstrate on historical grounds that Jesus was raised from the dead, that it was the most likely explanation, because no other explanation actually made sense. And if no other explanation made sense for the data that we had, that there was an empty tomb, and that people claimed they saw Jesus, and various data, that there's no other really satisfactory explanation. Therefore, probably Jesus was raised from the dead on purely historical grounds.
Yeah, I think I would sentiment that. I believed it, and I think naively I just accepted it. I took at face value what the text said. I think what was missing from my personal life, and this is why I was like, when I interviewed Bart Ehrman in the past, I was a little bit taken back because I was like, hold on. it wasn't figuring out that there were contradictions and this was legendary and there was a lot of fiction that made you not a Christian. And he was like, no, it was, I figured that out. I became more of a liberal Christian over time. And then later down the road, it was like philosophical questions about the problem of evil that made him stop being a Christian. And I was like, huh. For me, seeing how fictive much of this material was made me question why I believed it at all. Because I believed it historically. I believed it was true. It happened. I believe Jesus was God in the flesh and that he rose on the third day and all of these things. Once you start seeing the Jenga tower pieces, oh, that's fictive. Oh, birth narrative didn't happen. Oh, hold on. Walking on water's legend. When you start seeing all those pieces come out, at some point, for me, my tower fell from that. Somehow, I guess he negotiated his faith and became more liberal, but then eventually problem of evil issues caused him to leave, from my last recollection of our discussion. So, yeah, again, I agree with him. I just accepted it at face value. I didn't do any like rigorous deep research. I was just listening to other apologists, echoing what I think 99% of viewers on YouTube who watch the YouTube channels that are apologetic channels, whether it be Islamic, whether it be Christian, whether it be, whatever it might be, they just watch an authority give them confidence. This is why you see in the online atheist / Christian / Muslim / whatever debate community out there, people are looking for wins in debate format. They think if their hero can argue persuasively through rhetoric, that their arguments are undefeatable or they're somehow winning. And that's unfortunate because I've been there. I was looking at William Lane Craig like my hero back in the day. Nobody can beat him in a debate. I looked back now that I've left Christianity and evaluated some of the debates he did where I thought he won, and then realized like, whoa, the glasses that I'm wearing are radically different. I did not recognize that. I see things different now than I did back then when I was drinking that Kool-Aid. So let's continue.
Interesting. I have heard that series of statements before. It is always a little surprising when people say that the best way to explain all of these data points is that someone came back from the dead.
Yeah, well, we would argue it, and we would just, drive it down people's throats. I mean, this is absolutely just like apologists try to do with me today. That's what I used to do.
Wonderful. So now you're on the other side of it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's always good for people to be willing to change their minds once they start thinking about things.
I love that. I really do. I mean, people need to be able to change their minds, right? And I wish more people changed their minds and tested other things out. Let's just be willing to explore and go where I think the data points. And at the end of the day, again, I think we'll notice this. We're doing history, right? Historical methodology. Sometimes you just can't get behind things. Okay, we're going to get into that shortly for sure. But I love that Bart's just saying, look, man, I used to think this and now I don't think that. And more people need to be willing to do that. So good to see everybody here. Here we go.
Instead of just sticking with what they thought when they were 13. And so, so I changed my mind on this one.
So what's the difference between demonstrating something historically and talking about it historically?
Well, historians try to talk about what happened in the past, and they try to show what probably happened, and they do that based on whatever sources and evidence that they have. And there are some things that you can talk about historically that are just they're historical events, and there are other things that historians are not able to show one way or the other. And so when it comes to something like a miracle, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about Jesus or if you're talking about the Emperor Vespasian, who is recorded doing a couple of miracles, or Apollonius of Tyana, or in recent times, the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidic Judaism. We have stories of miracles by all these people and by many, many more. And you can certainly talk about some things that are historically, established, such as You could probably establish the person really existed. You could establish that they had a certain kind of reputation. You could establish that people believe they did miracles or that miracles happened to them. Those are perfectly fine historical topics because it's just like talking about anybody else. And so you could talk about what can be established historically. You can talk about anything, but you can't establish historically things that historians cannot establish, including miracles.
Can you give us an example that isn't religious, isn't miraculous, just to try and elucidate the difference there?
Yeah, I mean, do you mean about a miracle or about a person? So,
if we're talking about actually, an example you used on the blog that I found helpful was the theory of relativity.
Yeah. So I myself can demonstrate to my absolute satisfaction that Einstein came up with the general theory of relativity, and I can quote part of the equation, and I can indicate that he ended up convincing the vast majority of physicists in the known universe. I can talk about those things. I am not able, because of my personal limitations, to show that he's right. It's beyond my ability, and in that case, it's just beyond my ability. There are other things that are kind of beyond everybody's ability, and you can show on the grounds of physics that the equation is right. You can't show on the grounds of history that it's right. The grounds of history would be, it's not a historical claim. Just like you can't show that a particular poem by Seamus Heaney, my favorite poet, you can't show that a particular poem of Seamus Heaney is a beautiful poem. You can talk about it, but you can't establish that it's beautiful because history doesn't establish beauty, and history doesn't establish laws of physics, and history doesn't establish it doesn't establish supernatural interventions in the natural world. Mm-hmm. These are just things.
So yeah, this is an important point. When you're dealing with history and you're wanting to know what probably happened in the past, history, you're not like making the case historically that the resurrection from the dead happened. At best, you can say, at best, people believed things happened. People believe all sorts of crazy stuff. But we just, I think, special plead these specific people in favor of their attestation of saying, oh, we believe that he rose from the dead, or Paul claims he saw Jesus. That's the earliest eyewitness we have. And it's a visionary explanation. And so when you're looking at that and you're going, the earliest guy in history claims that he saw, and that's granting that he's not making anything up. Like, you've never met the guy. You don't know the guy. You don't know how much goes into this. Like, if you were coming across Joseph Smith in a couple thousand years and you didn't have any of the evidence that was contrary to him, that, let's just say we're trying to make a case, and you came across him saying that he was a prophet and he did some things, and people believe they saw these golden plates or whatever, that he was a witness of them and that other people claim to be witnesses of it. You, without knowing about the child marriages or the young women he was marrying and all the other scandals that you see, what would you know about him if we didn't have that? What do you really know about Paul? All you know is these small letters that seem like he's saying he believes in Christ crucified. You don't know what he was doing on Wednesday night. You don't know if he was visiting brothels. You don't know if he was taking money from the church and actually somehow abusing his power and authority as a claimed apostle, which many clearly didn't think he was, which is why he constantly needs to reaffirm that to letters saying, I am an apostle. I am an apostle. He keeps trying to make sure, because some don't think he is, clearly. You don't know what this guy was really doing. All we have is the text, and people trust those texts. So the examples, like, for example, the problem with historical methodology is like a metal detector. It can't find a wooden chair in the ground, right? You're not going to be able to find a wooden chair. That's not the detector being unfair to the wood. I could hear people come in and go, well, you're just ruling out God. you have a bias problem. No, it's a tool problem at best. Historical methodology is a tool problem. You're not going to find the miraculous using historical methodology the same way a metal detector does not. It doesn't find wood. Okay. It only reads metal. History only reads natural causes of natural evidence. That should be a no-brainer, but I think a lot of people don't understand that. Take, for example, a thermometer. It cannot tell you how much you weigh. You cannot, you can be the best thermometer in the world, okay? And you will never get a number in pounds. It doesn't do it. Wrong tool, right? A ruler that we use to often in school measure, usually it's a foot long. A ruler cannot tell you whether a song is beautiful, right? It's the wrong tool to measure. I think I saw someone in the chat, Ramada, say something. Let me see something here. They said something about philosophy. Philosophers can establish it because historical methodology excludes supernatural explanations by default. Of course, that's the point about the tool. But I don't know how a philosopher can even establish the miracle. Like, how can you establish a miracle philosophically? What does it make it you make a plausible hypothesis for that? I'm curious how you can philosophically establish a miracle. Like, I don't see. I think you can think of a world philosophically that permits or allows miracles, but I don't know how you can establish, like we just talked about. You said earlier that you can't prove using history, right? You can't prove, but it seems like you're saying in philosophy you can prove the miracle. I'd be interested to see that. Dan, Dave, RC, good to see you. You can prove that it did not happen, as we know none of the other events associated with this God ever happened, like Adam and Eve, Noah's Ark, Moses, Exodus, Jonah in a well. It's all mythology. So I don't go so far as to say you can prove. I am much more cautious in saying you can prove a negative, but I think we have positive evidence to support ideas that make way more likely sense historically than what seems to be the least likely, the one that doesn't happen on a regular. And we're going to continue hearing Bart. I watched this while I was working earlier, and I was like, okay, he covers a lot in this video, so it'll be good. Ramada says, because philosophers are in the business of that. I know tons of philosophers who would say that you can't prove a miracle using philosophy. So I'm not sure. So philosophy can only show possibility, not occurrence. Kind of dumb observation. Prove those things didn't happen is usually the reversal. We're going to get into some of this stuff because it's like there are so many other explanations that make better sense. A visionary explanation is psychology, and Bart isn't a psychologist. Nope, he's not. But we know experts who are. And, we've talked to many of them. I just think, if you watch the main apologist and you start bringing up other things like the golden plates, you start bringing up with Joseph Smith, you start bringing up other visionary experiences. They are quick to go to psychology through hallucination, through natural causes, or even if they have to pull out the demon card on you and go, oh, demons did it because Satan's the one who's making counterfeits to trick you. How do you know yours isn't a counterfeit? That Satan isn't deceiving you with the New Testament? Once you start opening these doors, it is Pandora's box. It opens up and you can make cases on why it is demonic. If you really have that if you're that open to the worldview that all this stuff is real, like these things are true. But I do agree with the super chatter here. Again, I think you can make a really strong case based on heuristic approaches to other literature and seeing walk, talk, acts like a duck. And you see the other legends, the other myths, etc. And then you go to the New Testament and you find this material here. Bart doesn't cover this in this video, but I think that's an important thing to observe when you see those things and then you notice it in your New Testament. Those are signs of fiction, in my view. Now, what do you do with Paul and Paul's letters and the visionary experiences he's having as he's describing them in his letters? That is where I feel a serious tug of war on going down a psychological route of trying to explain what seemed to have happened here. Mystics, people were having this kind of sensational experiential approach to the divine. Paul seems to be somewhat of a mystic, some say. And even my friend Richard C. Miller, who argues more on a cultic level that this is what you do, part and parcel of developing cults, is having these kind of things. So you could imagine, like Joseph Smith, serious question, ladies and gentlemen. Do you think he saw Moroni? Do you think he saw the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit and had visions of these things? If you do, okay, you're going down the camp of psychological, hallucinatory, or even visionary. The other option is, did he fabricate it? Is he making up some of this stuff? Or is there a little bit of both? And I'd be open to a little bit of both. But I do think clearly you're dealing with Adam and Eve, you're dealing with Noah, you're dealing with ancient mythology, Moses, Jonah in the well. Yeah, that's mythology. Where it gets really rough, Dan, is when you get into Paul's letters. Even like mythicist Richard Carrier thinks that Paul is hallucinating. Paul's having visionary experiences, and he goes into great length in his book on the historicity of Jesus to highlight the ancient shamanistic kind of cultic behavior that people who were prone to have these kind of mental issues and seeing things and hearing voices in their head and stuff, that today we would say they need to speak to a professional. They were like cult leaders. They got promoted to being the head honchos because the gods were speaking to them. They could hear the divine in their heads. Today, we might call that person someone with, a bipolar syndrome or some type of schizophrenia or something, where I don't know if bipolar would fit that. I know schizophrenia would fit that. But like, we would probably diagnose these people. We can't diagnose ancient people through the text. We can't. So are they meditating and getting to a place where they think they're hearing voices? I know at times in worship in church, I believed I was hearing Jesus. But I was literally like putting myself, like trying to say, speak to me. And then after a while, like I'm almost like telling myself, this is Jesus speaking. And then I start making it's like, it was in my head. Anyway, it was in my head. But yeah, let's let Bart keep going. I derailed us there.
That history doesn't do. It's not the fault of history. It just isn't something that it can do. Any more than history can build a house. You just can't do it.
So what does this mean then in the context of the resurrection specifically? What can history be used to examine, or what can historians examine, and what is just beyond the realm of the discipline?
Great question.
So the first thing to point out is that when historians talk about establishing history, history is not actually the past, and the past is not necessarily history. The past is everything that's happened before. And everything that's happened is...
Bakken in the house. The resurrection was essential to Paul's gospel and revelation. I think Paul received an anointing similar to Exodus 30, something ethiogenetic. So I think you're talking, I believe he's taking some type of a substance. Is that what you're getting at? I'm curious. Looking for your answer, Bakken, on that one. Exodus 30. So let's pull up Exodus 30. And we're going to go to... Actually, let me do this. Cross Bible. My favorite Bible reader. Exodus 30. Okay. Sharing screen real quick here. Thank you for the super chat, brother. Appreciate that. Let's see. Exodus 30. Make an altar of acacia wood for burning incense. It is to be square, a cubit long, a cubit wide, 2 cubits high, and its horns of one piece with it. Overlay the top and all sides and the horns with pure gold, and make a gold molding around it. Make 2 gold rings for the altar below the molding, 2 on each side of the opposite sides to hold the poles used to carry it. Make the poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Put an altar in front of the curtain that shields the Ark of the Covenant before the Ark of the Covenant law before the atonement cover that is over the tablets of the covenant law where I meet with you. Aaron must burn fragrant incense on the altar. I don't know if that's where the fragrant incense on an altar, if you think that's something there. He must burn incense again when he lights the lamps at twilight, so incense will burn regularly before the Lord for the generations to come. Do not offer an altar, any other incense or any burnt offering or grain offering, and do not pour a drink offering on it. This is a temple sounding material though. Like, so are you suggesting this probably is, 23 is take the following fine spices, 500 shekels of liquid myrrh, half as much, that is 250 shekels of fragrant cinnamon, 250 shekels of fragrant calamus, 500 shekels of cassia, all according to the sanctuary shekel, and hin of olive oil. So I don't understand what you're suggesting he did here. Is it just like, because these guys are probably going to, through the incense and other things like that, they're maybe ingesting stuff. They're going to put themselves in the mood to meeting God, so to speak. Are you saying, like, you think Paul probably did some type of entheogenic type of hallucinogen or something that put him in the state of having these mystical revelations? Is that what you think happened? I mean, clearly we don't have a text that describes that for Paul, but I'm just trying to get your personal opinion on it. You think that's what happened? I know he goes out into the desert, Arabia, likely to the Arava, whatever, probably Dead Sea, could have been Petra, could have been, various locations somewhere there in the desert. But, he did have, or he claims to have had some kind of conversion experience before going out there. Anyway. Yeah, let me see. Calamus is kana bosom, and yes, LOL. Okay, gotcha. Got it. Thank you, Bakken. Appreciate that super chat, bro. Yeah, so I kind of figure you would think. I would just say this, maybe. I also would say there are lots of people who experience things without taking psychedelics, without taking drugs, that meditate. They put themselves into a state of fasting. They're dehydrated. They meditate or whatever, and they don't necessarily have to ingest or smoke or breathe in something that is causing them to go into that state. I think that they will, all I'm saying is you could be right. I know there are people who have these experiences without taking anything. And I'm sure in the ancient world, that was the same way. So the Exodus 30 thing works perfectly for a temple setting if Paul was like in the temple doing this, but I don't know. I don't know any clear reference to that. So it's a complete hypothetical unless you have some source that we don't have in the canon, of course, that might indicate that.
Okay, it's happened. And so history is our ability to show what probably happened in the past. But there are trillions and trillions of things in each of our lives that cannot be established historically as having happened, even though they happened. And so the example I use with my students is like, I cannot demonstrate historically what my grandfather ate on May 1st, 1927. I just can't. I mean, it happened, but I have no access to it. In this case, I don't have access to it because I don't have any sources of information. But it just shows that things that happened in the past are not necessarily what we can establish as history. Miracles like the resurrection, there are things about the resurrection that we can talk about that you can establish because we have sources and we have information and we can establish them as having happened. But historians cannot establish that a miracle happened because a miracle is a supernatural intervention into our natural world. And historians can only establish what happened in our natural world. And so a good analogy, I think it's a good analogy, maybe people won't like this analogy, but a good analogy is that it's not possible for historians to establish that God intervened on behalf of the Allies to win World War II.
Hold on. Think about that. There's a lot here. Okay, we need to go. Think about this. Millions of people. In World War II, we know is like the bloodiest war in history in terms of the most casualties ever in any war prior. Like, we don't have a war in history that ever did what World War II did historically. Millions of people prayed during that war on both sides, on all sides. Both sides were sure God was with them. Okay, I'm gonna go full screen here. Both sides were sure God was with them. A historian can document the prayers, the belief, the outcome, All of it, right? And a historian still cannot tell you that a deity tipped the battle. Now, if we look at Jesus, right, we can document that people came to believe he rose. Seems to be people that believed he rose from the dead. That belief seems to be one of the more stronger historical facts when you go back, right? What that means is quite interesting because there's a lot of interesting debate on what resurrection even meant. And Paul's trying to convince people who seem to have a different view in the Corinthian church about this. But anyway, that's so whether a dead body was reanimated by God, all right, is a completely different kind of claim. And no amount of what they really believed it, okay, they really believed it, closes any of that gap historically. So sincerity is evidence about people. People really believe, people really think they saw things. It is not evidence about physics, about reality, about what actually happened. And I think that's where it all boils down to for this apologetic situation. That's why it's cumulative. It has to be this cumulative case. You can trust them. Oh, we have prophecy. Like there's all these components they try to work on. But ultimately, it boils down to Paul in his letter says that he saw Jesus and that Jesus is risen from the dead. And that soon, of course, all of this evil will be over with. He's the first fruits, and that everyone who dies after that will eventually be raised that's in Christ. And they'll have glorious bodies just like he has a glorious body. So the resurrection will also apply to the believer. And all of this boils down to a belief system that these ancient people have that you're trusting when you're reading this material on faith, not because there's any historical data to actually like convince you. This is what is convincing you is that someone else believed it. That's really what it boils down to. Someone else believed he rose from the dead. That's it. It really does boil down to other people claim that they saw him after he was dead. And then if you show them tons and tons of other people in history who claim they saw people after they were dead, Elvis, for example, we know is more of a contemporary fun one. The rabbi that Bart earlier mentioned, that many think he rose from the dead, that doesn't move the needle for them at all. It doesn't bother them one bit. So what? People hallucinate. People da-da-da. He wasn't the Son of God. Well, this rabbi they do claim was the Messiah. So in that case, it is within the Jewish framework. But like it's always got some other explanation. And 2,000-year-old material from someone else's belief isn't very convincing to me. It used to be, but not because the evidence was there. It was just I had an emotional experience when I accepted the Lord, and I had an altar call when the social pressures and the placebo that was kicking in during that altar call that I went down and accepted, like William Lane Craig describes. And I was willing to just believe and then start with that belief and then work backwards to try and prove it. That's what I was doing.
They can believe that. You know, personally, they might think that God answered prayers, and that's why the Allies won against odds. But it's not something they can establish because you don't have any access to what God was doing. And that's true of every miracle. A miracle, by definition, is something that violates the natural order, and historians can only deal with the natural order. So when you apply that to the resurrection, you can certainly establish that there was a man, Jesus, I think, and that he was crucified, I think. And you can establish that after his death, some of his disciples claimed to have seen him alive, as well as at least one person who was not one of his disciples. And you can establish that they claimed that Jesus' tomb was empty later. And you can establish Christianity started and it became the world religion. These are all historical facts. You know, there's no problem with establishing those things. What you cannot establish is that God intervened in history and reversed the natural order of things in order to raise Jesus from the dead. That's beyond.
There's a lot there. So we have to unpack that, right? Bart is literally saying these are historical facts. And a lot of apologists will try to box Bart or me or anyone in this, what he just said here, right? The Habermas and Lycona crowd built a whole strategy called minimal facts. All right. They say, look, even skeptical scholars like Bart Ehrman, you're hearing him, grant these. So you have to accept the package. And here Bart hands them a version of that list, the minimal facts. And I want to do two things here. First, I'm going to show you that you do not even have to grant all of it, because there are real reasons to be careful. Then I want to show you that even if you grant it, you still don't get a resurrection. So we have a pile of forgeries. Here's some reasons to be cautious, okay? If we're looking at the New Testament, we have a pile of forgeries inside that New Testament. Letters written in Paul's name that Paul did not write. Things like the pastorals in 2 Peter, which most critical scholars consider not genuine. If people were willing to forge documents and sign an apostle's name, why would I just trust the chain of custody on the most important claim of all? We have contradictions all over the resurrection accounts. How many women? What were their names? How many angels? Where Jesus appeared? Who saw him first? Bart says it himself across this episode, but and of course elsewhere. The reports cannot agree on the basic scene. That is not what reliable testimony looks like. We have money in the picture. This is an important one a lot of people don't really focus on. They always talk about this. They had no motives. Why were they willing to die for their beliefs? They had no motives. These were not neutral, disinterested reporters. They were leaders. Paul was a leader, or claiming to be an apostle. He was a leader with reputations and finances riding on the message. Paul ran big collections from the churches and used striking language about it. So like 2 Corinthians 11, verse 8. I robbed other churches by accepting their support in order to serve you. I'm not telling you Paul was a con man. He could be. He could not be. Joseph Smith, okay? He could be like that. You just don't know this guy. I want to be fair, though, okay? He actually refused to pay the pay, or he claims, when you're reading, it's kind of a messy thing, because he refuses pay from Corinth, okay? And the line is kind of sarcastic. It sounds like he's saying, like, look, you'll pay these other guys. They can be married. They can get paid from you. I don't want your money. But then he like whines about how he's not getting paid, and that, you know, it is written, you shall not muzzle, an oxen while it threshes, talking about him and planting the gospel and all of that kind of stuff. So it seems like he does want to get paid from them, though he's trying to, like, I don't know if people were saying, we're not giving you money, dude. I'm not sure. We don't have that correspondence. We can't see behind the letter. But the point is simpler, and it still lands in this passage, because the people carrying these stories had skin in the game. They were not outside observers. When you're weighing testimony, that matters. And let me just point out another thing. Granted anyway. What Bart says is granted anyway. Say Jesus existed. Say he was crucified. Say some followers claim to see him. Say the movement took off. Fine. Bart grants all of that, and he still says the resurrection is not the best explanation, because none of those facts is a corpse was reanimated by God. The minimal facts argument smuggles the conclusion in by quietly treating the tomb was empty and they saw a real risen Jesus, or risen body of Jesus, as if they were on the list, when those are exactly the disputed claims. Granting the facts does not get you the miracle. It never did. And when you're looking at this material, you have, like, they just want to go, okay, you can grant that, you can grant that. You're just, you're biased toward the miraculous here. I just think that more fiction needs to be read. I think our friend Ramada, who's in the chat, was talking about philosophers can establish this. I'd be curious to know how many philosophers would say this, knowing how much fictive, legendary, mythic material existed in the ancient world. And when you compare accounts and you see that, like Romulus ascending into heaven and giving a great commission, and all of these miraculous accounts we find from other materials that sound similar, not identical, have a similar miraculous scent to them in the texts. What would philosophers say when you weigh out how many other characters are born of divine fathers and mortal women and perform miracles throughout their life, whether it be Asclepius, Hercules, even Isis from the Egyptian material? You have that in the mystery cults going up to the 1st century. She was healing and doing all sorts of stuff. There's a ton of material here. What would philosophers who actually know about that material say if they actually factor that evidence in? Wouldn't they be way more cautious? Wouldn't they say, I think I'm gonna say let's be careful. Let's at least just be agnostic and not jump to conclusions. Instead, what I find is there's a strong historical push. We must make the gospels as historical as possible. Then when you find legend, when you find myth, then we can go, oh, but we have to take each case individually. We have to go, well, no, those are clearly mythical. We don't accept those stories. That's the same thing the critical scholars I'm talking to, Robyn Faith Walsh, M. David Litwa, Richard C. Miller, Dennis R. MacDonald, and the list goes on and on, are saying about the New Testament stories, that it's similar in nature, in how they're being written, crafted, etc., to the other legends, the other myths that we're finding out there. In some cases, the character in those other legend, or really myths, likely didn't exist. Not in all, but in some cases, that character didn't exist. But then when you turn to people like Apollonius of Tyana, and you see that this guy actually existed and does miracles, et cetera, what do you do, right? So there's a lot riding on this. Let me see this. Bakken, thank you for the super chat. Paul, like Simon, sought to bribe the church after the Council of Nicaea. He sought to buy apostleship after the Council of Nicaea. Are you talking about in Acts, right? I'm 50-50 if Paul was first to introduce resurrection. Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting point, because the reconstructed Q ideas that scholars put out there, they say that Jesus was he had an assumption to heaven, similar to what Josephus describes for Moses. He's taken up to heaven after his death. Not that there's this like reanimated, he comes back, he's alive, same body kind of thing. There's no narration of that, of course. Resurrection, I know Marcus Vincent argues that it seems to be a later thing. I believe James Tabor and other scholars think Paul's the one who has the atonement theology, and he introduces that. That's not something that came prior to Paul. I think Bart might disagree. I think Bart might think the earlier guys before Paul had belief in resurrection as well. Not so sure. I think from an interview I did with him like 2 years back, he mentioned that. So I don't really know what to do before Paul, whether they believed he rose from the dead or not. It is at least in Jewish thought that this could happen. And we know instances, not only within the Jewish material of individuals, Lazarus, widow of Nain's son, Elijah and Elisha stories, but also in the Greco-Roman Mediterranean world. And I keep pulling this book off the shelf, but where did I set it? Oh, Jesus and Other Sons of God, the Daniel B. Oh, I'm not even full screen. Daniel B. Glover's book. I've shown you Luke's Christology and Mediterranean Myth. In this book, he compares and shows that the resurrection, Christology, etc., we got to look to the Mediterranean world. And there were several figures who were understood to come back to life, to be assumed to heaven. Individuals who did this, not just groups, right? Because, resurrection is usually couched within Jewish apocalyptic thought and eschatology and stuff. So a lot of people go, well, this is totally rare. There is no instance of an individual. Apologetics usually tries to say. I did a video, the last video I did against Jeremiah Johnson. I cover this at length. And anyway, I just went down a rabbit trail based on the super chat. I'm with you. Like, I don't know. It could be earlier, but it wouldn't shock me if Paul, in his gospel, Galatians 1, that he received, is unique. It wouldn't shock me. It would not shock me one bit. Doc Plormanat in the house. Thank you so much for the super chat, brother. Good to see you here. Thanks for being a member as well. A philosopher would ask, are we proving a miracle happened or just proving your worldview allows miracles? Those are not remotely the same claim. Thank you, Doc. Appreciate the super chat. Yeah, I don't know how you could establish a miracle philosophically. I just don't know how you could establish that. I think you could hypothetically work out, like you said, possibilities and reason through worldviews and say, well, if you grant this, then like you can come up with ways to make that an option. But I don't know how you can establish it for sure. Thank you again. I appreciate that, brother. Real number 9. The 500 claimed to see a resurrected Jesus. Thank you for that comment, actually. And look, this is something interesting. There's a ton of scholars that are Christians, like Del C. Allison Jr. He says all the time, like, we don't know who they are. We don't know where they are. Paul doesn't even like seem to give any interest in even telling the Corinthians who they are so they can go fact check him. No, he just drops it like, trust me, bro. And then that's it. So the question I would have is like, the 500 claimed, and it says more than 500 brethren, and some are still alive, etc. So is this another kind of Fatima type of thing, like an experience where people are claiming to see something? Can you trust what is being written there? Can you trust it? Is he making something up to convince the viewer, the person who's reading this text that he's writing to this church? Is he making it up? I would just like pull out like what just recently was brought up by Alex O'Connor with the idea of Mormonism. Would we trust that the transfiguration of Brigham Young into Joseph Smith, all of these people claim they witnessed him transforming? Do we trust that he transformed into Brigham Young? I mean, it sounds like I have the same issue with my brother-in-law and my brother on UFOs. So we're out of the Jesus range, because this is a sensitive topic for people who believe, right? But when you start talking about UFOs, UAPs, etc., there's some people who are pretty sensitive about that. My brother, my brother-in-law, and they think I'm too skeptical. And I've told this story before, and I'll mention it briefly, as I came across this picture on Facebook where there was bird poop on a windshield. I'm just telling you the conclusion up front. But I didn't realize it was bird poop on a windshield. I was kind of like, what is that? It was like a blob, and it looked like it was in the sky, and the person taking the picture was in the car. And they told this story about this object that was following them home, and I was believing the story till the end. They go, well, why didn't you just stop and realize this bird crap on your windshield, right? So I played them and said, guys, I've been wrong. You're right. Something was following me and Ryan all the way home. I showed them the image. I told them the story. Trust me, bro. And they said, told you. They thought they got me. 5 minutes later, I start chuckling. I said, look at that picture again. And they're like, what? I knew you were going to do something like this. And finally, I'm like, bro, it's bird crap. And then they were like, oh. And I said, why is it that the most probable, likely, natural explanation for what is going on is like the last thing you'll accept, and you want to believe what seems to be something if it is true, it's like the one time, right? Wouldn't you be more cautious about that one time and go with what seems to be what happens on a regular, what is more probable, what happens all the time? And that's my method. My method is, what is the most likely, natural, obvious thing, right? Getting to the 500. I stop and go, what 500? Did really 500 people claim to see Jesus? Did Paul make this up? Is there any way to vindicate or validate this? And the only other thing I could think of is if a mass group of people claim to have seen Jesus somehow, I think of Mary and Fatima and things like that. That's the best they got, in my opinion. And most of the Christians who aren't Catholics don't accept it's actually Mary appearing. And by the way, when you investigate those miracles, you find out Muslims also went and witnessed, and they saw the mother of the prophet. They didn't see Mary. They saw the prophet's mother, Muhammad's mom. What do you do with that? Now you've got subjective interpretations about a phenomena that we just can't vindicate. Or, you know what I'm saying? It becomes kind of problematic. And I'm hearing it through an ancient story or ancient letter 2,000 years ago saying 500 saw them, and you could go and investigate them, or, some of them are still alive today. Apologists claim they could have investigated them, but he doesn't give them a list. He doesn't say where, who, what, when, where, and all these things. And that's it. Close the book. Trust me, bro. That's what I hear is trust me, bro. So I try the best I can to be fair and use, evidence that we have from other examples of people who say they saw phenomena, they believe they saw something miraculous or whatever. And then I look to this and go, well, is this like that? I don't think you could do much with the 500 claim. There's not much there. And also there's a scholar who thinks that in the Greek, I can't remember, there's a few scholars, I think, that have hinted at Pentecost and 500, something literarily going on there as well. So I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. Another super chat. Bakken in the house. Thank you so much for the super. After Jerusalem Council, when they reject Paul, Josephus records what Saulus does next. He gets permission to rob and end lower priests' Essenes. He never gets jailed, goes to Rome to get an army. After Jerusalem Council, when they reject Paul, Josephus records what Saulus does next. Okay. He gets permission to rob and end lower priests. Never gets jailed, goes to Rome to get an army. I want to look at that more because I know that you probably, along with Jacob Berman, are more, I think, interested in seeing Saulus in Josephus as some character that influences the Luke Acts story. We know Luke Acts is borrowing. I mean, I'm persuaded. I think the evidence is strong. Luke Acts is borrowing from Josephus for some of historical insight. But yeah, I need to dig into this Saulus character a little more. Wrap my head around who he is. What's he up to? I really don't know a lot about it, but it'd be interesting to see if Luke Acts is tracking this, what you're describing, what's going on. What is going on there? So, Bakken, thank you so much. All right, stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. Stay tuned. Here's the other thing, Ramada. You're right. You're absolutely right. 500, Cephas and the 12, James and the apostles. Which, by the way, several scholars are like, that sounds odd. Seems like people are inserting things into this list, like it doesn't sound there's good reason to think maybe there's an interpolation here in this material. So there are critical scholars who think of that as well. They're like, you got Cephas, the 12, then James and the apostles, you got 500, and last of all, you get to Paul, right? And they think that list has been tampered with. Some think the whole block has been interpolated. I know Robert Price thinks that. All right, let's continue.
What historians can do. Whether you like it or not, historians cannot establish miracles.
So we can use the sources that we have to look at how people seem to have responded to Jesus' death, how they explained Jesus' death, and the rise of the argument of the resurrection, and then how that was used to build, or how that was involved in building the religion. But that's very different and distinct from saying history can in fact establish that Jesus was raised from the dead. That's right?
Yeah, that's right. And so again, I'll emphasize, I'm not saying that it didn't happen. That I'm saying if it happened in the past, if it did happen, we don't have historical access to it because it's a super historical event. Somebody coming back to life again, but being raised by God. That view that's what happened in the past requires a belief in God and some access to knowing what God did in the past. We have no access to what God did in the past, and so that's why it's not we can't talk about it as a historical event, even if it did happen. But let me say also that since historians cannot show that a miracle happened in the past, well, the corollary is true as well. You can't show it did not happen in the past. History cannot disprove a miracle. If you can't prove something, you can't disprove it.
that comment. If you can't prove something, you can't disprove it. All right. Let's look at that. Because this is intellectual honesty. All right. The whole brand we're here for. I'm not standing here claiming I can prove the resurrection did not happen. Nobody serious can prove it never happened. I don't think that's an option we can make. And here's why it would be silly to put that burden on me or on Bart or on anyone who's claiming they're not convinced. Watch what happens when you demand that a skeptic disproves a miracle. All right. Prove Romulus was not carried up to heaven and turned into a god. The Romans had eyewitness testimony for that. A man named Proculus Julius, who swore Romulus appeared to him. I want you to prove that he didn't. Prove to me, let me come back to me full screen here. Prove to me Romulus was not carried up to heaven and turned into a god. Prove it. Prove that the Emperor Vespasian did not heal a blind man with his spit. Tacitus and Suetonius both report it. And they are better historians, in my opinion, than the gospel writers. I mean, I don't think it's just my opinion. I think anyone who's looking at historiography, they talk about sources, they talk about where they get. The gospels don't do that. The best you get is Luke's prologue, the best you get. And even then, he doesn't name who they are. He just says, I got eyewitnesses and people before me, trust me, bro. That this is more an orderly account. There's no like, I got this from so-and-so and so-and-so said, and none of that. And also there's no caution, right? Prove that Caesar Augustus was not fathered by the god Apollo. Suetonius passes the story along with a straight face in his histories. Prove the holy man Apollonius of Tyana did not vanish out of a Roman courtroom into thin air. Prove it. Prove that Muhammad did not split the moon in half and then miraculously puts it back together. Notice, you go, but I don't see a fracture. I don't see a crack. It's a miracle, don't you know? Prove it didn't happen. Well, we don't have any eyewitnesses that ever claimed on other sides of the world. Prove it. Prove that. Who cares? So what? Lack of evidence doesn't prove it didn't happen. Prove there are no leprechauns guarding pots of gold in Ireland, okay? You cannot disprove any of those. And nobody thinks you are obligated to do so. We all understand the person making the wild claim carries the burden, not the person who is unconvinced. The resurrection gets a special pass only because it's familiar to us. Strip the familiarity away, and it sits right there next to Romulus and the splitting of the moon and all of them. So no, I do not have to disprove it. Bart does not have to disprove it. The apologist made the claim. The claim is theirs to prove. What I can do, and I like to carry some of the burden. I want to make the point, though. What I can do is I can make arguments for why we shouldn't just trust it. And it complicates the picture when you find out contradictions, you have forgeries, you have legendary making of the material. And you could see when you line up the material side by side that the tradition itself is growing and changing over time. That starts to complicate a picture because what is the picture? The picture is this happened. Trust me, bro. Believe this really happened. That is why I like to carry the burden sometimes. I don't just like to say the burden of proof is on someone else. But again, that becomes the slogan when you say, look, man, this doesn't seem convincing. What typically happens? Well, prove it. You can't prove it didn't happen. I can't prove a ton of stuff didn't happen. I can't prove a ton of stuff that's natural, that isn't miraculous, didn't happen. There's a lot of things, but especially when you start getting into that more magical, miraculous, superstition, supernatural, extra natural, whatever you want to call it, realm.
So history is irrelevant to the question, as it turns out. I mean, it's weird that history would be irrelevant to the past. There it is. It is. That's the case.
It's kind of like looking at Egyptian pharaohs and saying the people of the time believed them to be divine. They were understood as kings, but we can't say, yes, they were indeed immortal beings.
Yeah. I mean, how would you prove that historically? You could say yes or no, but it's not based on, I mean, what would your historical grounds be for saying that a particular pharaoh was a god? I mean, yeah, you can't do that. And of course, Christians would say, well, of course he wasn't a god because, but that's based on their theology, their religion. And that's great. That's fine. You can do that religiously. You can't do it historically. Historians are only able to establish what probably happened in the past.
Yeah. So we're going to take the rest of the conversation and look at what historians can actually say about Jesus' death and the following events. And I wanted to start with the burial. What do the Gospels say about Jesus' burial?
So all four Gospels agree that Jesus was executed by crucifixion on a Friday, and that on the third day, people went to the tomb. Either one woman went to the tomb, Mary Magdalene, or several women. The Gospels all disagree on how many women, what their names were, who there were. But they all agree women went to the tomb and that the tomb was empty. and that the women saw a person or two persons or an angel or two angels, depending which account you read, who told them that Jesus had been raised from the dead. And so you can investigate whether it's true that Jesus was crucified, and you can investigate whether he was buried and whether women found an empty tomb. The burial in all four accounts is there's a man named Joseph of Arimathea who requests Jesus' body from Pontius Pilate after he died, and Pilate allows Joseph of Arimathea to take the body. They take him off the cross. Joseph takes the body and puts it into a tomb nearby, a cave tomb, one hewn out of stone nearby.
So as far as historians are concerned, is the crime that Jesus is charged with, is the punishment, does the punishment of crucifixion match the crime that he was charged with? Is it reasonable, given the legal system of the time, for him to have been crucified?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and it's absolutely, it is true. This is absolutely right, that he was, in the Gospels, he's not killed for blasphemy against God or for disagreeing with Pharisees or for any internal Jewish disputes or breaking the Sabbath, nothing like that. He's crucified for calling himself the King of the Jews. That's consistent throughout the Gospels. Romans took it very seriously when somebody claimed to be the ruler of the land that they were the rulers of, and they typically would crucify people for insurrection. And so that's right. Crucifixion was reserved for either really the kind of people who were very low on the totem pole, for the poor and the outcast, and for slaves, and for insurrectionists. And it was considered the worst form of death penalty you could get in the empire. But if you're claiming to be the king, yes, that would lead to crucifixion.
We're going to take a very brief break, but when we come back.
Okay, so they're taking a quick break. I figure why not comment on that? Yeah, add to that he cleansed the frickin' temple and is claiming to be a Messiah, a king. That'll get you killed. Not only is he out here cleansing a temple, disrupting the sacred grounds in which the religion is running, they're flipping over money tables and all that kind of stuff. And there are some, I have my buddies, where is it at? First Century Radical. I've been moving books around so much, I'm not sure where I put it. Good book. He was a student of Geza Vermes and worked with him and all of that. Anyway, it appears that there's a plural. It wasn't just Jesus there in the temple. It seems like many of them were part of the process of cleansing that temple. Now, you could say that seems fictive. Cool. Still, in the story, it seems to be what triggers him in being in big trouble. Him claiming to be a Messiah, and he's actively out here cleansing the temple. He's physically disrupting. It's like I don't know, blowing up the cars with money that are going to the banks because you hate our financial system. And like, if you end up doing that and you're willing to stop the money to get where it goes, all of this stuff, you're going to be a criminal, period. And he actively gets treated as a criminal according to the ancient law in which they lived. So yeah, that was the question there. But Joseph of Arimathea, I'm hoping that gets brought up again, because I've got some stuff I want to show you about Joseph of Arimathea, or at least discuss going between the Gospels on the growing development of this character, because he's not the same in the earliest to the latest material.
I'm going to be asking a bit more about Jesus' burial and whether he would have even been put in a tomb. Yeah. But before that, we have a very fun promotion that we're doing for the entire month of June. And it's really unlike anything that we've ever done. And I'm not 100% sure that they're going to be, or Chris is going to be doing it again. So if this is something you're interested in, you should absolutely take advantage of it. Bart has selected a handful of his favorite courses that we've produced at Paths in Biblical Studies. We're going to be calling them Bart's Picks. And for the month of June only, you can get them for whatever you want to pay. So you can pay what you want for Bart's favorite courses. It can be $1,000. If you think that it's worth $1,000, you could pay $1. It's literally whatever you want to pay. I'm not going to tell you what course courses Bart has picked. You have to go to the website to work that one out. But if you've ever purchased a course, if you've not purchased a course from us, there we go, perhaps because of affordability, or you weren't sure if they were right for you, or it's just been really bad timing, now is the best time to do it, because you can just pay what you want, test it out, see if it's something that you enjoy, and really learn something interesting about the Bible and early Christianity. So you can go to bartehrman.com/courses anytime this month, and you'll see all of the promotional information there. But this is a really, really great idea. I hope lots of people take advantage of it.
Sounds like a crazy idea to me, but go for it. So, yeah, no, look, and look, people will pay what they feel it's worth, and that's fine. That's absolutely, or what they can. Part of our goal with the Paths in Biblical Studies, of course, is to reach as broad an audience as we can, in order to spread what scholars have said about the Bible. And so we've done well over 50 courses now. Not all me. Most of them aren't by me anymore. But I've done a lot of them. I've done a lot of them. And so but we want people to have access to them. And so this is kind of an interesting way to spread the word a bit.
So you can go to bartehrman.com/courses and see what's available. And I really hope you will have fun with it. All right, we're going to get back to Jesus and the resurrection now. And before the break, I asked if crucifixion was a reasonable punishment for the crime Jesus was charged with. The answer was yes, absolutely. So the next question from that is, do you think that Jesus was buried in a known location? I know this isn't typically something that happens with victims of crucifixion.
No, it's not. And it's this, again, is a historical question. Is it likely that somebody, a rich Jewish person, was able to ask Pontius, get an audience with Pontius Pilate and say, let me have this particular body so that I can bury it? And the answer to that, I think, is that it's highly implausible historically. We don't have detailed explanations of how crucifixion worked in the ancient world. When you see the Jesus movies, they always have some way of doing it, but we don't have description of it by ancient people, probably because they knew full well how it happened, and they didn't need to describe it. But we're kind of at a loss about, like, how did they always use a crossbeam? How did they make it upright? How did they nail the person? Did they sometimes they tied people? Sometimes how did they decide? We don't know those kinds of details. What we do have lots of references, not lots, we have a number of references to what happened to crucified victims once they died. Because it's referred to in a number of places in all sorts of ancient genres, from kind of what we would call fictional accounts to historical accounts, biographical accounts. We have references, and what is clear from just every reference I've ever seen. I tried to look up every reference I could in every Greek and Roman author at one point, and what they all indicate is the person was left on the cross for several days. So that after they died, as part of the humiliation. In the ancient world, even more than today, people wanted a decent burial. Today, of course, everybody wants a decent burial, but in the ancient world, there was this really kind of passion that you've got to have a good burial. And the Romans threw this in the face of people who were being crucified. They would allow them to be on the cross for several days, where the body would start decomposing and be attacked by scavengers. It's a common line about how birds would attack these bodies after they died. And so it was part of the punishment, and it was meant to show that Rome is all powerful, and the crucifixion itself is demonstrating Rome's power, because if you're attached to a cross, you cannot move your limbs, and you're just hopelessly there until you die, and then they leave you there, and you decompose, and birds go after you, and that's what happens to you if you cross Rome. And so that was part of the disincentive for insurrection. And so the idea that you'd have somebody just kind of out of the blue come up to the governor and say, "Oh, could I have the body?" And the governor say, "Sure, take him."
By the way, I'd quite like to bury this person.
I'd like to bury this person, And we don't hear anything about the other two people was Joseph of Arimathea particularly concerned about Jesus because he thought he was the Son of God, and that Pilate agreed he's the Son of God, so he should be given special treatment? Or did they do the same thing with the other two? The other two aren't mentioned that way. And Pilate probably crucified a few people the day before and a few people the day after. Are these people like, why Jesus? Well, it makes sense to Christians, of course. I mean, it's Jesus. But, historically, we don't have record of that kind of thing happening. We don't know of a single instance of, a specific incident of somebody ever doing this. And so I think it's unlikely. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot there, and I'm sure he's going to get into another topic. I can't recall, but Joseph of Arimathea getting the body of Jesus, he is saying is unlikely. Let me share my screen and show you something interesting here. Let me actually pull up. Where is it at? There it is. Okay. We're going to get into this. This is important. Growing legend of Joseph of Arimathea, because I think people don't know this. Bart's making a historical case. We just heard, right? And I think it's pretty strong. I mean, he's trying to say, show me the other examples. I want to show you something he doesn't really deal with in this so far, dealing with Joseph of Arimathea. It's a thing I love to see, is the story growing over time. Joseph of Arimathea does not stay the same across the Gospels. He gets more Christian, and his tomb gets fancier every single next gospel, you could say. Don't necessarily pay attention to the timelines here. I had this cooked up by Claude to just make a really fanciful image to show people, but because I'd put Luke and John in the 2nd century. I don't know where to place Matthew. I definitely would say it's after Mark, of course, but anyway, so you have Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent council member who was also himself looking for God's kingdom in Mark. He laid him in a tomb which had been cut out of a rock and rolled a stone against the door. If you notice something, more often than not, what we do is we have the whole picture in our minds, and we anachronistically have this idea about who Joseph of Arimathea is. Especially when you've read the Bible as like a univocal text. You believe this is the canon, it's the scripture. It tells you the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God. We don't look at this as an evolutionary development when we're believers, of course. We're not taught to think this way. So he's not even called a follower in Mark, not a follower of Jesus. He is looking for the kingdom, looking for God's kingdom. He's a council member, but he's not like bona fide a follower. In Matthew, it calls him a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who himself was also Jesus's disciple. So now he's a disciple. And remember how much Matthew changes about the empty tomb. He has guards now because they say they stole the body. Well, they can't. There's guards there. Mark doesn't have any of that. The tomb's already open. Matthew, the tomb is shut. There is no open tomb, so you can't explain how his body went missing. He's correcting Mark. There's a lot going on. But what's added is now rich, now a disciple, his own tomb. Okay? This, Joseph is promoted to a disciple. The tomb becomes personal and brand new. This is where you start seeing the growing development. Luke, a member of the council, good and righteous man who had not consented to their counsel indeed. So now he disagrees with the decisions of the council against Jesus. You don't get that in Mark. Joseph's a member of the council, but you don't get this growing development in Mark. Mark doesn't say Joseph is disagreeing with the council of what's going on here. He's simply obeying Jewish law by requesting that they bring down the body of Jesus. But then the question then becomes, what about the other two? Like Bart Ehrman said, the two other people that die on the cross or that are up there on the cross with Jesus, did they also get buried? You know what I mean? These are questions you have to ask. And what do you do with that? And then, of course, he says a tomb cut in stone where no one had ever been laid. And then John, a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews. Nicodemus came with myrrh and aloes, about 100 Roman pounds, and a new garden tomb. So you get, in Mark, baseline, Joseph helped condemn Jesus. He's part of it. He's part of the council. Then buries him. Joseph is promoted in Matthew to disciple. The tomb becomes personal, brand new. Luke cleans up the problem of Joseph voting to kill Jesus as part of the council. And then John, a royal scale burial, royal level, like 100-pound, this one, the most lavish version, and it's written last. So you can see the growth. And I want you to also pay attention. Pontius Pilate has this as well. Pontius Pilate. So it's not just me cherry picking here. The exact same thing happens to Pilate, except his legend grows in the opposite direction. The real Pilate was a monster. Watch him soften decade by decade until the church literally makes him a saint. So Philo and Josephus, first century, how they portray him is a brutal, corrupt governor, massacres, theft from the temple treasury, executions without trial. This is the real guy, right? Now let me show you. I hope everybody could see this. This here is Philo. Where is it at? For he was a man right here. For he was a man of very inflexible disposition and very merciless as well as very abstinent. They cried out, "Do not cause a sedition. Do not make war upon us." This is the part where the apologists will highlight, well, look, they nag him enough and threaten him enough to the emperor that he realizes he doesn't want to do this. Therefore, the nagging worked in convincing Pontius Pilate to relent, to not do what he did. So what did they say? What did he say of Pilate, and what threats did he utter against him? But it is beside our purpose to present to really. This is a large portion from Philo of Alexandria's work. If you're looking for the source, I'll link it in the chat. On the embassy to Gaius, the works of Philo, earlychristianwritings.com. And this is paragraph, what is this? 299. All right. Let me put this in the chat for you, everybody, if you want to go read this for yourself. But they'll say, well, look, in the Gospels, you do have them bending his ear. Yet Pilate still, I mean, over one dude, this whole, like, it's going to, I get it if you're doing a massive thing with a huge crowd of people that are doing this. That's where they would say, nope, there's the pushback. I don't care if he was a POS. He still would have let the guy go. It goes beyond that, though. He doesn't just crucify the dude because he's being bent in the Gospels. He then has to then give him an honorable burial, honoring the customs of the Jews. So he's not just doing one thing, he's doing two things. He's just like bowing to what the Jewish people are wanting. And the Gospels do portray him as like, all right, listen, I don't find any fault in this guy. So even if you grant that Jews could have somehow swayed him under the pressure of, we'll tell Caesar, you're not going to get him going, I don't find anything wrong with this poor Jewish guy. No, that's not the picture that you get about Pontius Pilate historically. That needs to be understood. Now, Mark, Pilate is hesitant, but he still orders the crucifixion. I'm going to come to me full screen here. Still hesitant, but he still orders the crucifixion, and he's hesitant. Matthew washes his hands now. His wife has a warning dream, not in Mark, and he declares himself innocent of Jesus's blood. Of course, they say, put his blood on us and our children. Luke declares Jesus innocent 3 times. It's like this guy's like, dude, he's innocent. No, dude, I don't want to do this. He's innocent. No, what's going on here? That's not the Pontius Pilate and Philo and Josephus. Come on, quit playing games, ladies and gentlemen. And then John, even more sympathetic. He keeps insisting he finds no case against Jesus and tries to release him. Then you also have the Gospel of Peter and later texts of blame shifts fully off of Rome and on to others. Pilate becomes almost a friend of the truth. And then there's Coptic and Ethiopian traditions where Pilate is turned into a saint and venerated. Tertullian even calls him a Christian at heart. Come on now. Like once you start seeing how it's growing and it's growing and it's growing, something's going on. So Joseph of Arimathea gets more devoted throughout the Gospels. It grows. Pilate grows more innocent because both of them serve the same goal. It makes the Romans look reasonable. It puts the blame somewhere else. And when you see the character drift into inconsistent direction across the retellings, you're not watching history. This is legend. Okay. You're watching a story continuously being shaped. So who was the real Pontius Pilate? We read the Philo one specifically. He was brutal, obviously. Let me pull up some more sources for you. Let's see. We've got Flavius Josephus here. The Wars of the Jews, his first writing. After this, he has raised another disturbance by expending that sacred treasure. So now he's going into the sacred treasure of the temple, which is called Corban, upon aqueducts, whereby he brought water from the distance of 400 furlongs. At this, the multitude had great indignation, and when Pilate was come to Jerusalem, they came about his tribunal and made a clamor at it. So he went into the temple of Jerusalem, took money out for the building of aqueducts, and the Jews were pissed. He didn't give a shit. He did it. Another one, Antiquities of the Jews, which was written 15 to 20 years after, published around 93, 94, which I think Luke Acts is borrowing from. But Pilate undertook to bring a current of water to Jerusalem, and did it with the sacred money, and derived the origin of the stream from the distance of 200 furlongs. However, the Jews were not pleased with what he had done about this water, and many 10,000s of the people got together and made a clamor against him and insisted that he should leave off that design. Some of them also used reproaches and abused the man, as crowds of such people usually do. So he habited a great number of his soldiers in their habit, who carried daggers under their garments, and sent them to a place where they might surround them. So he bid the Jews himself go away, but they boldly casting reproaches upon him, he gave the soldiers that signal which had been beforehand agreed upon. I want to pause and say this. Why didn't this happen historically, since Josephus is talking about this? Why didn't this happen when the Jews are making a complaint about, no, crucify Jesus. There's only one Caesar. We'll tell Caesar. Like, dude, why didn't he have him slaughtered right then? The guy's willing to do it here. Like, really? You're going to tell me the historical Pontius Pilate wouldn't have had his soldiers pull out the swords and say, hey, shing, 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 you're done. He clearly is willing to do it with tens of thousands of people gathered together. This is a big deal. And he's willing to do this. You're going to tell me the gospel story where he's like, oh, poor Jesus, he's innocent. I don't find any fault with him. And then eventually becomes a saint, is not legend, is not fiction. I'm sorry. I'm not buying it. Who laid upon them much greater blows than Pilate had commanded them, and equally punished those that were tumultuous and those that were not. Nor did they spare them in the least. And since the people were unarmed and were caught by men prepared for what they were about, there were a great number of them slain by this means, and others of them ran away wounded, and thus an end was put to this sedition. We also have another one here in Antiquities. This one is a bit longer. Pilate prevented them going up, but seizing. So there's a lot more here in Pilate, and I'll put the link to this in the chat. I don't think we need to read all of this. I mean, that'd be a lot to read. I'll just say this. Pilate sent cavalry into a crowd. This story specifically is dealing with the Samaritans at Mount Gerizim. And he sends his soldiers, a cavalry, into a crowd of Samaritans at Mount Gerizim doing some type of religious ritual. And he slaughtered all of them. And that massacre is what finally got him recalled to Rome. So that massacre, because they were innocent, these Samaritans on Mount Gerizim weren't saying, hey, Pilate, we're going to blackmail you. We're going to get you in trouble. No. They're just doing a religious ritual because they were in a group, a massive group doing a ritual at probably Mount Gerizim. They're Samaritans. That's their holy mountain. He ends up having them slaughtered. That's what had him recalled, because these people weren't doing anything. They weren't threatening blackmail or anything, just random attack. I could see the emperor going, okay, that's enough. Probably already had enough troubles with him before then, but he clearly didn't have a fear to the point where he wasn't willing to do things like you just saw Josephus describe. But the Gospels themselves, like, they leave a fingerprint of the real man. Like Luke 13:1 mentions. Let me pull up Luke 13:1. In fact, let me get over here. Can you see this? Yes. Let's go to Luke. Luke hints at something here. Luke 13:1. Now, there were some present at the time who told Jesus about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mixed with their sacrifices. Now, this may be the Samaritans. I'm not sure that it might be hinting at. But the New Testament knows that Pilate was a killer. They need him to not look guilty in the case of Jesus and put it onto the Jews. That's clearly what they're doing. So let's continue. Bart Ehrman, here we go. Sorry for the long, but that was a necessary trail we needed to go down for people to understand historically what seems more plausible and why we would see a growing legend in the New Testament rather than look at what Josephus and Philo seem to explain about this cruel, evil man murdering people, doing crazy stuff. But we have a guy who's like ready to wash his hands and he doesn't want to crucify him. It's almost like they had to blackmail him in order for him to kill a guy that he doesn't give a crap about. Really? That would, like, one dude. You're really going to put up such a fight over one dude that's a Jewish guy that you clearly don't care about them and their custom. You're not a big fan of these people. That seems fabricated.
What are some of the other kind of strange things about the Joseph of Arimathea story that suggests this is possibly not historically accurate?
Well, for one thing, we don't have any record of somebody named Joseph of Arimathea. I mean, the only account is in the Gospels, and we don't actually know of a place called Arimathea at the time. And so the night before, he allegedly was in the Sanhedrin, which is the Jewish council taking care of kind of local governmental affairs. And we're told that the entire Sanhedrin voted for Jesus to be crucified. And then so Joseph would have wanted him crucified, but then the next day he wants to give him a decent burial. And so it's a little bit hard to figure that one out. But the main thing is that we don't know of anybody like this. We don't know of this ever happening in Pilate's reign. This is completely contrary to Pilate's own policies and personality. He was a brutal, ruthless guy. Pilate was not a nice guy. And he is famous for not paying any attention to what Jews wanted him to do. I mean, we have several accounts in Josephus where he just basically actually was ruthless when people protested against anything, let alone, just this random person asking him. And so it just doesn't stack up kind of in terms of Joseph of Arimathea, but it doesn't stack up from what we know about typical crucifixion practices.
So I've heard people apologists argue that there was something special about the Jewish-Roman relationship, and that the Roman government would not have wanted to anger the Jewish population, and so they would have been given special dispensation to allow Jewish victims of crucifixion to be given a proper burial. Is there any kind of historical truth in that?
It's based on a statement by Josephus. Josephus was a Jewish historian who was writing about 50 or 60 years later, and he said that Romans gave kind of special privileges to Jews to take them off the crosses and give them burial. So a couple of things about that. One is he doesn't give any single instance of it happening. He doesn't name any instance of it happening. The only instance he mentions, there actually was one that he was involved with, where Josephus, when Jerusalem was destroyed in the year 70, Rome was just crucified masses of people, just the opposition. They just lined the streets with crosses, and two of the people that they were crucifying were friends of Josephus, and he persuaded Titus, the conquering general, with whom he had. It's a long story about Josephus, but he had connections with Titus. He had two of his friends taken off their crosses before they died, and one of them survived. But that's a different thing. That was taking someone off the cross before they died because of a personal favor with Josephus, who was the translator that Titus was using for the whole episode. So,
okay, there's a lot there. Real quick, I won't keep you long. He just described it. Do I need to really go on and describe in great detail? There is a scholar, and I cannot remember. Chat, you might remember this scholar. There's a scholar who makes the case that even the Gospel of Mark might also know Josephus, and that you could probably Google it. In fact, I could probably look this guy up. Actually, let me look up Westar Institute's. He published through Westar. Let me look up, because she sent me, Linda Hodges sent me his material via email. In fact, let me go into my email and find it, because I have an article that you can get it at Westar Institute that covers the scholar who thinks that the woe saying Jesus and Josephus was borrowed by Mark, that the story of the three men on a cross, one survives, two die, or one ends up ultimately living, may have inspiration from Josephus' material, but also the woe saying Jesus that we have, the one that's constantly saying, woe, woe to you, woe to you, woe to you. That Jesus in Josephus, who cries out, woe, gets arrested. And then what ends up happening is, like, years later, he finally opens his mouth again. And he's like, woe to you again, woe to you, whoa, whoa, whoa. And then a catapult crushes him. There's a scholar who thinks that Mark is copying that. Please forgive me. I'm looking to see. Whedon, Weeden, I believe it is. So let me look up my email here. Whedon. 2 articles for you. That's right. Okay. So I have one here. It's Foundations and Facets Forum, new series, fall of 2003, The Two Jesuses. So The Two Jesuses by Theodore J. Whedon. Two Jesuses, Theodore J. Whedon. I'm going to put that in the chat. Remember that, because it's just worth knowing, okay? I don't know. But this scholar, if you can get your hands on this material, definitely worth checking out. So in this, he has the case for Mark's initiation of the story of Jesus, the son of Ananias, the Mark and Jesus and the Jesus, son of Ananias, the case for Luke, and the final Q redactor's imitation of the story of Jesus, son of Ananias. So he's like going deep into Jesus, son of Ananias in this and compares them. So he doesn't get into the two guys. The last time I've heard anyone try to parallel the 3 guys on the cross, including Jesus, and the 3 guys on the cross that Josephus ends up calling down and asking for their bodies from Titus, is Joseph Atwell, who tries to see there's some type of borrowing going on. That seems to be the Gospels are lifting this from Josephus's biography. I think this is from his biography, not from Antiquities, not from the wars. This is something that is in his biography, if I'm not mistaken. But in that case, you'd have to then argue that the relationship of Pontius Pilate to the Sanhedrin, especially this one individual, Joseph of Arimathea, which I've even heard some people speculate, they wonder if that's Josephus or something. It is Joseph. It's another Joseph, but that might be just parallelomania. But Joseph of Arimathea goes to Pontius Pilate, and he has that kind of bond where he's like, hey, man, let me get this body down, bro. You know, look out. Let me get him and put him in my tomb or something. Like, I've heard people that try to make that case. We don't have a time machine. All we can do is make a probabilistic thing. Do you really think Pontius Pilate's going to be like, yeah, go for it? No problem. Definitely. He fights to get this guy not crucified, which is odd. But then he's not going to fight to have him brought down once he's crucified. And they gave him hell about it all day, saying you need to crucify this guy. But then when he goes to do the thing that they're supposed to do, which is leave them up there, now we're supposed to take him down. So it sounds like he's getting bullied. I don't see Pontius Pilate get bullied in history the way that it seems he's the one bullying. And of course, he loses his job for being a bully. That's just my opinion. Based on what I'm reading here, that's just it. Don't know what to do with that. Make of it as you will. All right. Let's see. Did I miss anything? Yeah. So, okay. The apologists usually use this. They point to a line in Josephus, right? That Romans sometimes let Jews bury their crucified. 2 problems. 1, Josephus is a propagandist writing for the dynasty. This is what he's saying, that just crushed the Jewish revolt. And he has every reason to make Romans look gentle. Two, the one real case he gives is the opposite of the gospel scene. Friends taken down alive as a personal favor, with only one of the three surviving. That's not a dead insurrectionist handed over the same afternoon for an honored burial. And remembering who we are dealing with, the man Philo just described, we were reading, the likely fate of the body was a common grave or pit, not a rich man's rock tomb. It's just odd, you know. Let's keep going. I'm sure there's going to be more that Bart brings up.
Doesn't give any instance of somebody who died who's taken off the cross, even though he knows of thousands and thousands of Jews for that happening. When Josephus says that Romans gave that special permission to Jews, he's saying it in the context of his writings, in which he's trying to show that Jews were not enemies of Romans, and that Romans overall were kind to Jews. And he's doing this because he's writing this back in Rome. He was taken prisoner. He was a general of Jewish troops, and he's become a court historian for Vespasian, the emperor. and so he's trying to write this thing to mollify the relationships between Jews and Romans. And so so he's just trying to make Romans and Jews look good to each other. In this case, and since he doesn't cite a specific instance, and since we have no instance of it mentioned in any other source of any other kind, it doesn't look likely.
So what is most likely to have happened to Jesus' body? What happened to victims of crucifixion after they died? They were left up there for a while until they started to decompose and animals started to eat the remains. What happened when they were eventually taken down?
Well, the Romans would take them down. They'd probably want to reuse the cross. And so they would take them down after a while. I don't think there was a set amount of time. And they would dispose of the bodies. And so we don't have good evidence what they did with them, but they did something with them. The common guesses are that they would just throw them in a mass grave, or that they would just dig a ditch, and put the body in and get rid of it. And so we do have, we do have remains of a couple of crucified victims that have turned up in modern times. We know they were crucified victims. One of them has the nail still in his ankle.
This is the common. Keep this image in mind. This is a real archaeological find. It's important to understand, but this gets oversold. We got to talk about that.
Bone. And some people have used that as an argument that therefore Jews were allowed to bury their victims on the day of their crucifixion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always struck me as a very strange argument. If you find a person who had been crucified who was given a burial, how do you know when the person was buried? What makes you think it was that day? I mean, if Romans followed their policies, then they kept them on the crosses for days. So even if you find a crucified victim, doesn't mean it was on that day, the way it has to be in the Gospels. But more than that, it just shows that in a couple of instances, we know of people who probably come from very rich families who were able to provide burials for the remains after the fact. Which isn't the same thing, of course, because Jesus doesn't have a rich family, and his family's not even in Jerusalem. And the person who's, the Joseph of Arimathea story is just is about taking him off that afternoon by somebody we've never even heard of before.
So this is important. I believe the guy's name, the ankle bone to this, Yehonan, the guy who found in 1968 in Jerusalem. It's a obvious archaeological case of a crucified man who got a burial with the iron nails still through his heel. But apologists wave this around, and you notice Bart answered this as proof that crucified Jews got buried. That's how they name it. Like, crucified Jews got buried. But Bart, he's very, very careful and specific in saying it's one case, almost certainly a wealthy family. So the family has, money, and nothing tells you, there's no indication that guy got buried the same day, which is exactly what the gospel timeline, demands. You hear Christians all the time say, this is evidence that they did bury crucified victims. Yeah, once you're like a skeleton there and your ankle bone still has a nail through it, they're probably going to put you inside of an ossuary or something like that, or somewhere in a grave site. You're going to get buried. This one, I believe, was found in an ossuary, which means it was likely someone who had money. They're burying one of their loved ones or someone they cared for. So they buried him, and they probably couldn't get the nail out, but he got buried. Okay. When? Like, did they ask for the body to be taken down and then get buried? And that's what you're saying is that, no, it doesn't give you any of that. So one rich exception does not become the rule for a landless Galilean preacher whose family was not even in town. It doesn't work.
That's very different.
So if we've kind of covered the act of crucifixion, the burial question, if we look at the Gospels again as our main sources for this story, who is the first to say that Jesus is raised from the dead, to use that explanation for why the tomb is empty?
Well, it depends which gospel you read and which account you read. The Gospels all have, in the Gospel of John, it's Mary Magdalene who first finds out. In the other Gospels, it's Mary Magdalene with other women, different numbers of women, different names, so different accounts. Interestingly, none of the disciples is first. And one reason that's interesting is because when Paul talks about visions of Jesus after his death, or people seeing Jesus after his death, Jesus appearing to people after his death, he says Cephas was the first. That means Peter. And so Peter was the first, according to Paul. And Paul does not say anything about the women. And so it depends which account you read. But
by the way, that's a whole deep dive. Was Paul like male-centric? Dell Allison talks about this in his book on the resurrection as well. He seems like Paul's more centric on men in this situation, but like that seems like an excuse. Elsewhere, Paul seems like he's fond of women apostles or women who are part of the movement and are important figures. Just depends on where you go. You could read one place where it seems like Paul wouldn't say women should be silent. And then you have other places where it sounds like Paul does seem to say like women need to be silent and go to their husbands to learn. There seems to be mixed signals here. And what do you do with that? It's a debate.
But it's either Peter or it's Mary in the accounts.
Are there any other explanations in the Gospels for why the tomb is empty, or is the resurrection accepted by all of the apostles?
Well, the interesting thing in the Gospels is that whenever the disciples find out about the empty tomb, they doubt it. And so do the women. It doesn't bring faith.
Think about that. People always, modern apologists who use the argument, they're using the empty tomb as a piece of evidence to support the conclusion that the resurrection historically happened. He just pointed out it doesn't bring faith. So when they appear to the tomb, when they see the tomb is empty, just like any of us would go to a graveyard and see that the tomb is empty or the grave is open or whatever, we're not thinking right away, oh, hallelujah. No, every one of them are like, where did you take my Lord? Where did you bury him? They're not convinced. That doesn't even do it. The empty tomb does nothing. It doesn't persuade even the people who supposedly came to it that early Sunday morning. So if it doesn't convince them, why is it being used as an argument to convince people today? It doesn't add up to me. Anyway, Bocking, thank you for the super chat, bro. The entire New Testament is a series of Trust Me Bro stories. There's some fun Trust Me Bro stories in there when you understand them as stories. But yes, there's a lot of Trust Me Bro stories. In fact, so much Trust Me Bro, you don't hear any time where they're like, listen, this is what they say. I don't know what to make of it. Herodotus at least is cautious even when he's writing his stuff. When he went to the Zalmoxis cult, right? Of the Gittai, people of the Gittai, he's like, this is what they believe. This is what they say. And then after he tells you what they say and believe, then he's like, and look, I don't completely throw out the whole story. I don't know what to make of this. He's cautious. He's not like, and then this happened, and then he did this, and you need to believe it. And it's like, no, the Gospels sell you. They want you to buy it. They want you to believe it. They don't want you to bring any critical thinking to the story. They want you to accept the story at face value. They want you to indulge yourself into the story world that it's portraying, it's painting. Thank you so much, Bach. Appreciate that super chat. Love you, man. Thank you.
Apologists today talk about the empty tomb as proof of the resurrection. And in fact, in the Gospels, it's never cited as proof. It's people doubt it when they see it. What makes people believe is the appearances of Jesus. But even when Jesus appears to people, in every case, they doubt.
Think about what he just said. This is why I had to do a reaction to this video. How often do you catch me doing react? I need to do more on Bart Ehrman, okay? I do enjoy listening to Bart Ehrman. I enjoy his interviews. I love listening and learning. He has a way of teaching that is very interesting and easy to latch onto. But like, not only is the tomb not convincing people, and modern apologists act like if we can get them in the tomb, we can get him in the tomb, and then we can get them convinced that he's not in the tomb, they'll somehow be one step closer to the convincing. And it's like, dude, no, you still have to have the appearance. And then, as Bart just said, he appeared to many and they doubt. They're the ones doubting and they're seeing him. Matthew 28 talks about they're on the mountain and they see him after the resurrection, and some doubt. Some of them are doubting there. So even the appearances aren't convincing like that. They're not sold even after they see him. And you expect someone like me, or you expect those who are critical of this, that aren't buying the story, aren't convinced, to somehow like overcome our critical faculties and accept the story as if it's so convincing. And it's not. It's just not. If he appeared to me, okay, that would be the best bet on convincing someone like me. It would need to happen to me. It would need to happen to many of you watching right now. That's just it. It's pretty simple. Not a warm and fuzzy in my gut, because guess who else can give me that? Joseph Smith's form of Christianity. Islam can give me that. Hinduism can give me the burning bosom. The wrong jalapeno poppers from Texas Roadhouse can give me warm and fuzzies. All right. I don't need emotional. I've had plenty of that. I've experienced things from drugs to hypnotic, meditative worship type of experiences. That doesn't do it. That's a human natural thing. We all have. Every religion has it because all humans have it. I would need something on a whole nother level. You know what I'm saying? A whole nother level. That's what I would need. We got a super duper in the house. Oh, someone has true salvation. Mr. Anderson, thank you so much for this. You're the man. No, seriously, appreciate you for the super chat, my friend. It is possible that Pilate, being familiar with the Jewish high holy days, understood that in order to maintain the peace, removing all bodies from the crosses was best. Thus, why all on crosses are killed in John 19, verse 31. Let me pull that up. John 19. By the way, this is the latest gospel. Scholars would say this is the most embellished, but verse 31 is okay. Let's pull this up. Here we are. Okay. When he had received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." Every account has a different saying from Jesus at his death. With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Now, it was the day of preparation. By the way, John has him on a different day than the synoptics. So it's not even the same day as the synoptics. Historically, we got a problem. Which day is it that Jesus is being crucified on? It's not even the same day as Mark, Matthew, and Luke. Anyway, and the next day was to be a special Sabbath because the Jewish leaders did not want the bodies left on the crosses during the Sabbath. They asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down. So maybe the story's developing kind of like Matthew has guards at the tomb, which Mark doesn't, and clearly trying to explain why they didn't steal the body, because Matthew says to this day, Some are saying that the disciples stole the body. Seems like they're needing to do more apologetics to explain, well, what the heck? Crucifixion. Maybe someone said, they don't just take people down once they crucify them. And that was way too short notice. So they need Jesus to have died. They don't want them breaking his legs. But they also need the guys next to him to die in order to bring them down. And where do they do? Do they bury these guys? They don't say, do they? The soldiers therefore came and broke the legs of the first man who had been crucified with Jesus, and then those of the other. But when they came to Jesus and found that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. This is where they poke him in the side. Spear side, sudden flow of blood and water. The man who saw it has given oh my gosh, I've seen videos where people are showing like, this has got to be factual because if you hit the certain spot, it's got water and blood coming out. And the man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you may also believe. Notice that added there. To a guy on the outside who's not buying it anymore, when you have to say this, for me, oh, hold on, the super chat was hiding it. After you get done saying everything, right? Broke the legs, found him, he was dead, spear in the side, blah, blah, blah. And then you say, the man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you also may believe. Right after that's like, I see what you're saying though, Mr. Anderson. Like, logically, you could see why someone could try to make this plausible or try to make this make sense. Like, you got to get it down. The sacred day's coming. But this is the red flag for me. It's like, believe me, bro, I would not lie to you. I'm telling you the truth. Trust me, because I would not lie to you. I promise you, so you could believe me, so that you may also believe. It sounds like they're working overkill to convince you of something. And the same problem at the end of the book, right? The things that they talk about, if all the things that could be written, the world could not contain the books thereof. This is John 21, I believe. Let's go there. And it's at the end of John 21, which a lot of scholars think was added later. This is the disciple who testifies to these things and who wrote them down. We know that his testimony is true. By the way, he wrote them down, but they're the ones who know his testimony is true. It's an odd thing. It doesn't seem like the disciple wrote this down. They are writing it down. We know that his testimony is true. Well, hold on. Why are we know his testimony is true, but you're saying the disciple who testifies and wrote, he is the one who wrote these things down? It doesn't add up. And Jesus did many other things. Can you see that? Yeah, you can see that. Jesus did many other things. Okay. Anyway, yeah, I get what you're saying though. Like, you could see them trying to make sense of it historically to make, why do we have to bring these guys down? But I'm skeptical that Pontius Pilate did that based on the other evidence that I see. I don't think one dude, I don't know. If we had a time machine, we would know though, wouldn't we? All right, continuing with Bart.
They're doubting because he's right there. He's talking to them, but so you certainly get that doubt tradition. In the Gospel of Matthew, you get an alternative explanation where we're told that Jews claimed that the disciples stole the body of Jesus. And they have to be, and so that's a rumor that is put out by Jews to explain the empty tomb. And so in Matthew, the idea is that Jesus really was raised, but they wanted to cover up. And
another one, Mr. Anderson in the house. John uses blood and water later as witness to testimony in his epistles. So Hugo Mendez wrote an awesome book on this. I always look there. Let me go see if I can get that book. It's worth plugging real quick. Bear with me. Okay, here we are. So this is the book. The Epistles of John, Origins, Authorship, Purpose, and he highlights that he believes the letters are a forgery in line with the Gospel of John. So they are going to carry into them the blood and water that you're talking about that is in John's gospel. So I think this is definitely a worthy read. He also has the book that is talking about the Gospel of John and how it, is attached to, I believe it's him. I know Goodacre does this, and I know James Barker does this, but I think he specifically deals with John. I got it somewhere on my shelf. Anyway, go look up Hugo Mendez. Put it in the chat. By the way, he actually is somebody that was in Bart Ehrman's office and is still in Bart's office. Bart's retired now. And Hugo Mendez is somebody who debated with Bart for years in the office. They debate over all sorts of stuff. Him and Bart would wrestle over ideas. Yeah. So what does the blood and water mean? I think it's an interesting question because if we go back to Nicodemus, you got to look in the story, right? I wonder if being born from above, Nicodemus doesn't understand. You're a teacher of Israel. How do you not understand? A man must be born from water and then from spirit. I wonder if there's some relationship to this idea and the idea of being born again. It's a theological thing. Obviously, the water would make sense from a woman, or her water breaks when she gives birth to her child, a human mortal birth. But then you have a heavenly birth. And is that heavenly birth due to the idea of the blood? I don't know. I wonder. I also look to Adam and Eve sometimes and think to myself, notice that the tomb in John is in a garden. I think of Eden in some way. Like this is the last Adam, and Eden is where the garden was, a garden of sorts. And I wonder if there's some theology going on there with Adam in the Garden of Eden story and what's going on with John's usage of a garden for the burial and the tomb of Jesus. Notice he's misunderstood as a gardener. I wonder if this is kind of hinting back to Adam, but then add to that idea that from Adam's side, you do have a woman, the bride, Eve, that is born. She's created out of Adam's side. Is the blood and water symbolically the bride of Christ, the woman that would be created? I'm getting theological. This is totally not provable, but I wonder if the imagery was understood by Christians at that time, that the blood and water from his side is a way of saying, yeah, it's like a death. In fact, the usage of the term that Adam is put to sleep in the Hebrew, in the Old Testament, he's put to sleep. Sleep is synonymous with death often. And you kind of wonder, is there something being theologically played out in this story with Jesus and his side? Anyway, sorry for the rabbit trail there, Mr. Anderson, but that's my thoughts, you know what I mean, about that passage. Could be wrong. Totally fine with it. All right, back to Bart. Thank you for the super chat. Interrupt anytime. I can use all the support I can get.
So they knew the tomb was empty, so they said, well, the disciples stole the body.
Do any of the disciples kind of persist in their doubt for the whole of the gospel story, or is everyone ultimately convinced that, yes, Jesus was raised?
In the Gospels, they appear all to come to believe, but it's not clear. Historically, you have to ask, why do you have all of these doubt traditions? Where the tomb's empty, it creates doubts. And in the Gospels, even when they see Jesus, they doubt.
Real quick. This is an interesting observation too. Walhold, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, pushes the anti-docetic edge. The blood matters because John wants a real embodied Jesus, not a phantom Christ. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, this would be against the idea that Paul preaches. Blood and bone. Luke uses blood and bone, but I think it's flesh and blood will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. And notice blood is emphasized theologically later. The Docetists are clearly not fans of this idea of blood and flesh, and you get this pushback. So yeah, that could matter too. But the question I have is, like, would it really matter if blood is coming out of his side on the cross? He's not resurrected yet. That's something that happens post-resurrection that I know that John and Luke are clearly emphasizing. But maybe it's the fact that the blood is draining and then yet he still has blood in him. I don't know. Thank you for that. Just thought it.
You got to like prove that he's alive again. Like in John and Luke, he actually, eats fish to prove that he's a real body. So presumably has a digestive system still, and he's a human again. And so, but he's having to prove it. And the weirdest passage is in the book of Acts, chapter 1, verse 3, where we're told that Jesus spent 40 days with his disciples, proving that he was alive with many proofs.
40 days?
It took him 40 days.
That's a long time to prove something, yeah.
40 days. And what kind of proofs do they, what?
Guys, it's day 3. Touch my toes, touch my fingers. Did you feel that one, Peter? Huh? Did you feel it? All right, guys, tomorrow let's come back and prove it for the 4th day. We only have 36 days left till I have to go back upstairs. I got to really nail it into you guys so you know.
Are these proofs? I mean, he's there. He's talking. They're talking to him. So the fact of this doubt tradition being so prominent in the Gospels makes me think that probably the Gospel writers and the author of Acts knows that some of the disciples really did doubt. They never did come to believe it.
So does it seem to have been the empty tomb specifically that gave rise to the belief in the resurrection, or is it a little more complicated than that?
I'd say it's precisely not the tomb.
Fantastic.
Because, and it's for 2 reasons. One is because, as I said before, in the Gospels, the tomb never convinces anybody, because you can have all sorts of explanations for it.
Here's where I personally would pull up Richard C. Miller's work, because the body going missing, while the narrative is playing out like, where are they? They're not sure. Where did you take him? The body going missing in all ancient accounts, even contemporaneous stories and novels and stuff, when the body goes missing, it indicates they have been assumed to heaven. They are divine. They have gone and become divine, become divine. I think that's a fair statement. That is an important aspect of the literary work, and I would recommend Richard C. Miller's book. In fact, I have his book right here. Let me make myself full screen. Richard C. Miller, Resurrection and Reception in Early Christianity. If you haven't read, go read. But that empty tomb motif is a well-known legendary one. When the body goes missing, you know why. Because they cannot remain in the grave, just like Heracles' bones cannot remain in the ashes of the fire, and several other figures' bodies go missing. He documents all of this in his book.
Empty tomb, and so my first thing is that it never creates belief, and the second thing is you could have all sorts of explanations for the empty tomb. You could say, you went to the wrong tomb. Or somebody stole the body. The disciples stole the body. The Romans moved the body overnight because they wanted to put it somewhere else. Joseph of Arimathea was just putting it there temporarily. Then he moved it, and then he got killed by a soldier who saw him do it, and so nobody knew. You could come up with like 20 explanations for an empty tomb. And so I don't think that is at all what generated faith. And I'll point out that we don't have any reference to an empty tomb until 40 years after the event.
Okay. Hold up. Let's come back for a second. Okay. We don't have a reference to any empty tomb until 40 years after the event. All you have is he was buried in Paul. There's no empty tomb. There's no tomb narrative. No indication it had to be a tomb. Burial, again, in the ancient world could be common grave. What is Paul talking about 15, 20 years after the supposed events that took place? And then 40 years later, you get an empty tomb narrative. You can see the growing legends that are happening. The other thing he described there, other than the 40 years later, you have this empty tomb story, is, of course, Paul never mentioned the empty tomb. I point that out. He says he's buried and raised. He gives a list of appearances with no women and no tomb in it at all. The first empty tomb story shows up in Mark, and that is at least 40 years later, written by someone in another part of the world, speaking another language. And here's Mark's tell. In the original ending, the women run from the tomb, say nothing to anyone. Think about how convenient that is. It's built-in excuse. It is a built-in excuse for why nobody had heard this story for decades. And that's actually the explanation many scholars bring up, is that why did they not tell anyone? Well, look, that's why you haven't heard the story yet, because you haven't heard this story because the women didn't go tell anybody yet. So it's an excuse, even in the first gospel, of why you haven't heard about this empty tomb narrative yet. So when they invented it in the story, it's an excuse. That's one explanation. There's many others, but there's a lot that he just said. I need to rewind it because he said 40 years. Let me go. We're 31, 39.
By a soldier who saw him do it. And so
this is what I wanted to say. That's why I had to back it up a little bit. So there are so many other options, so many explanations for how this could have went down. Okay. It could be all complete legend. Richard C. Miller's point. I think Bart thinks that there was no real empty tomb. That's a story that was made up. It's a legend. All of that, I think he covers that in his book on not how Jesus became God. I can't remember exactly which book it was. But anyway, it's a book you can get on Audible, so you can listen to it. It's great. It might have been in his lectures of the Great Courses lectures, but I could be mistaken. I have all that stuff on Audible. But they could have buried him. Nightfall's coming, right? We just talked. Mr. Anderson had an interesting point about John. We got to get him down, right? Okay, you got to get him down. Temporary tomb, an immediate location, not permanent. The Sanhedrin come back and they relocate it after Sabbath. So Saturday evening, after the Sabbath, they relocate him to a more permanent location. Those who wanted him dead on the council, that the night he went, before he ended up before Pilate, those who were part of that project that had him killed and then buried under the law custom of Jewish ideas, then went and relocated him. They're not buddy with Christians. They wouldn't have had Jesus killed if they were. They're not going to call and go, hey, Peter, yeah, no, not row 40, tomb 4. No. We moved him to row 50, tomb 16. Yeah. That's where you could find his body at. Yep, go there. No. So there are many plausible explanations for why he wasn't in the tomb, even if he was buried in a tomb somewhere else. That's why Matthew invents the guards. That's why you have such a problem. It seems so obvious when you're not already drinking the Kool-Aid.
Paul says nothing about people finding the tomb empty. And the first account we have is in the Gospel of Mark. Somebody living in a different part of the world, speaking a different language, who has no references to speaking with any eyewitnesses about it, who says the tomb is empty. And his account is contradicted in its details in all the other Gospels, which all contradict each other. And so I don't think the empty tomb is going to be the kind of the core for why people want to think Jesus was raised from the dead.
I agree.
So what do you think it is or was that gave rise to this belief, if not the empty tomb?
I think it's absolutely that some people said they saw Jesus alive afterwards. Paul says that explicitly. Paul's the only eyewitness that we would have. So, if Jesus died around the year 30, Paul's writing his letter to 1 Corinthians around the year 55 of the Common Era, say. So in mid to late 50s. So Paul's writing a letter 25 years or slightly more later. And that's the first, and he says in 1 Corinthians that Christ appeared to him. So that's the first time that we have any record of somebody talking about seeing Jesus. It's a person writing 25 years later, referring to an episode that would have happened 22 years before that. And that's our only eyewitness account. And so if you just think about like how you try and prosecute this, say, in a court of law, where you've got to prove what happened in the past. If what you've got is one eyewitness who mentions it 25 years later, based on an account 22 years before that, is that going to convince a jury that he actually saw Jesus? And when you're thinking about Paul in particular, if Paul had a vision of Jesus, how did he know it was Jesus? He wasn't a follower of Jesus. He had no idea what he would have looked like. Is it that he saw somebody who told him he was Jesus? Presumably, but how does he know it's Jesus? And could it have been something else? Could he have seen somebody in the distance that he thought was Jesus?
So the way he's describing that visionary experience is interesting. Paul's own language is a heavenly vision, it seems, not a man eating flesh like we see, or fish. In Luke and John, you can see the more physicality. In Galatians 1, he says, God revealed his son in me. That's an inner apocalyptic experience, not poke the wounds, gospel tellings of Jesus. And I like what Bart said there. Like, how would he even know how to identify this guy? Even if he saw somebody, like, how would he know what he looked like? How would he know exactly who he was? It's a terrible problem. The other problem is we got to go to Acts, right? Because Christians rely on this particular passage. Let's share the screen. Let's go to crossbible.com. If you haven't gone to crossbible.com, you really should start using this Bible app. It's free. You can also join and be a member, and the great stuff there. Good guy, Stephen. He's a buddy of mine. So we're going to go to Acts 1, chapter 9. Okay, because this is where they land. I think it's important to understand. So clearly, they're on the way to Damascus. There's no horse that he falls off. That's all like inspired by art. He fell to the ground, heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? This is mimesis of the Old Testament, King Saul and David. Who are you, Lord? Saul asked, I am Jesus. Saul asked, and Jesus says, I am Jesus, whom you're persecuting. He replied, now get up and go to the city, and you'll be told what you must do. The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound. They heard, but did not see anyone. Huh. Okay. Let's just go to chapter 22 real quick. All right. And let's see. Let me look it up this way. Okay. Here we go. Verse 6, 22 verse. And about noon, I came near Damascus. Suddenly, a bright light from heaven flashed around me. This is Paul speaking. I fell to the ground and heard a voice say to me, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? I asked. I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting, he replied. My companions saw the light, but did not understand the voice of him who was speaking to me. Whoa, what happened? They saw the light? They did not understand the voice speaking to him. But then if you go back to Acts 9, the men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound, but did not see anyone. They didn't see anything. Like they aren't seeing a bright light. Like there's a problem here. So anyway, people have been noticing this for a long time. Really odd. Really odd. All right. Next up with Bart, and then we'll be wrapping up shortly. Great episode with Bart today.
Paul doesn't say anything about the conversation they had. And so that's our one eyewitness. And so I don't think it would stand up in a court of law, let alone, to base your entire life on it.
Ramada, dude. A light is not no one. They didn't see anything. It doesn't describe it. So if you want to get pedantic about the details, feel free to. We know that's like, for example, if you were reading the end of Luke, let's go to Luke. Let's look at the end of Luke here. Since we have to do this because, clearly every contradiction or issue is not an issue. The end of Luke has Jesus ascend into heaven at the very end. The same day he resurrects, he ascends to heaven. All right. I want to have an answer from you while I have you in the chat. Luke 24. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but then they entered. They did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. Let's see. It's somewhere toward the bottom. There's too much to read here. All right. Let's they gave him a piece of broiled fish. This is the resurrecting day. Like he's alive, same day. He took it and ate it in their presence. He said to them, this is what I told you while I was still with you. Everything must be fulfilled that was written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and Psalms. Then he opened their minds so they could understand the scriptures. He told them that this is what is written. The Messiah will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day. And repentance for the forgiveness of sins will be preached in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things. I'm going to send you what my Father has promised, but stay in the city. Don't go to Galilee. Stay in Jerusalem, contradicting the other Gospels, but I'm not asking you that, until you have been clothed with the power from on high. When he had led them out to the vicinity of Bethany, he lifted up his hands and blessed them. While he was blessing them, he left them and was taken up into heaven. Then they worshipped him and returned to Jerusalem with great joy, and they stayed continually at the temple praising God. So if you read the entire chapter 24, the same first day of the week, early morning of the resurrection in Luke, the same author of Acts, he ascends to heaven. Okay? If you turn to the next book, Acts chapter 1, right? He's writing his preface. He goes on, and I believe it's 2. Nope, it's 1. Here, but you will receive power from the Holy Spirit, right? Where's the 40 days? On one occasion, while I was eating with them, he gave them this command: do not leave Jerusalem. Same thing you saw at the end of Luke. Wait for the gift of my Father promised, which you have heard from me speak about. For John baptized with water, but in a few days you will be baptized with the Holy Spirit. Then they gathered around him and asked him, Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom of Israel? He said to them, it is not for you to know the times or dates the Father has set by his own authority. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. And he said this, he was taken up before their eyes, and a cloud hid him from their sight. They were looking intently up into the sky as he was going, when suddenly two men dressed in white stood beside them. Men of Galilee, they said, why do you stand here looking into the sky? The same Jesus has been taken from you into heaven. That's the ascension we just read at Luke 20:24. He's been taken to heaven. Will come back to you in the same way you see him go into heaven. Then the apostles returned to Jerusalem from the hill called the Mount of Olives, a Sabbath's day walk from the city. When they arrived, they went upstairs. That those who stood present. Where's the 40 days? Let me do this. 40 days. Oh, I skipped it. It was at the beginning of it. Sorry. After his suffering, he presented himself to them and many convincing proofs that he was still alive. He appeared to them over 40 days and spoke about the kingdom of God. So here's the problem. Luke 24, same day, 40 days, and then he ascends to heaven. Same day, 40 days. Same day, 40 days. How do you get these to match? Like, why would you want to make one is the same day he ascends? Are you going to say he comes back down and then spends 40 more days and then ascends? Or is it just okay to say there's two different accounts? The same way we have a cleansing of the temple in the Synoptics at the end of his ministry, and then a cleansing of the temple at the beginning of his ministry in John, they just don't agree. So why couldn't we read Acts 9, where he clearly says, the men traveling stood there speechless. They heard the sound, but did not see anyone. Are you going to say they saw the light, but they did see the light? Because when you go to 22, you're going to have to then explain why they see the light, right? As about noon, as I came near Damascus, suddenly a bright light. My companions saw the light, but they did not understand the voice of him who was speaking to me. So now they're seeing someone in the form of light. Paul doesn't see Jesus. He sees light. He sees light. That's why I keep bringing up Acts 9 and go, okay, why is it going back to, let me go back to Acts 9. That's why I'm like, when we're looking at Acts 9, I'm going, they don't see it. They heard the sound but didn't see anyone. But you're going to tell me they saw the light. In Acts 9, it seems like they didn't see anything. They heard something, but they didn't see anything. But you're saying that they saw the light. But the light blinded Paul. But it didn't blind them. It's just really, really confusing. So I don't buy it. I don't buy it. I just don't buy it. Yeah, but that Ramada, you're missing the point. You're saying Jesus ascends and then appears to Paul later. That's missing the point of the opening of Acts. Paul's not even a Christian yet. Paul's not a Christian yet in Acts 9. He finally is being knocked to the ground here. I'm talking about the beginning of Acts. For 40 days, Jesus is there. He doesn't ascend until the 40 days are up. At the end of Luke 24, he ascends the same day he resurrected from the dead. One says same day, one is 40 days later. One says that they did not see anyone, but they could hear. The other one says they saw a light, but they could not understand what was being said, almost like they can't hear. Like, what's going on here? Is this redactional issue? Is this a contradiction where the author had fatigue and messed up retelling what he said earlier? What's going on? These are all plausible explanations. Why is that a problem to not just accept? We got a problem, right? It's a contradiction. Anyway, all right. Let's get to Bart, and then we're going to wrap things up. Thank you for everybody who's been here, supporting, checking it out, live stream. I appreciate it.
But it's just my view. But we don't have other accounts until later by people who are not eyewitnesses. We have stories told by gospel writers who are living, for.
This is easy to explain. It's a matter of where you are positioned. No, it sounds like more like harmonization, like you're trying to make it work when there's several reasons to just say, no, they just made a mistake. Bart Ehrman did this when he was in another video I did with him, since we're reacting to his stuff. He said he spent all this time trying to justify a problem he found in the Gospel of Mark. He wrote a 40-page thesis and all that to his professor. And his professor's like, oh, that's clever, interesting. Or Mark could have just made a mistake. And then his whole world, he said, like crumbled in his brain. It was like, I never thought about that. Clearly, that's not an option for you, it seems. So, Mr. Anderson, thank you so much. That's why Paul's the false prophet. I mean, honestly, though, if you believe in the spiritual world, you believe that there are really gods and demons and all that kind of stuff, who's to say Paul's not being visited by an evil angel or something of an angel of light, but it's really Satan? How do you know that it's not Satan that is visiting him? Real question. I mean, I think that that's a problem once you open up that box, Yeah, that's Ramada. I think that the thing is, oh, did I miss your super chat, Bakken? I'm sorry. Let me scroll up. I think I missed it. I apologize. Ramada, yeah, this is SBL Scholarship 101. That's it's not easy. It's a contradiction. This is like, if it is based on perception or positioning, I didn't know this stuff until I actually started looking at critical scholarship and analyzing this stuff carefully and looking, going, oh, wow, I never would have noticed that. Acts 9 and Acts 22. There's no way I would have ever cared to even notice it as a Christian. And if someone tried to highlight it to me, I would find every reason to make it work. And this is what Jonathan McClatchy does, for example, which I've evaluated his stuff back in the day. They die on the hill of making it work no matter what. All right, back to you, Bakken. I missed it somehow. I apologize. Oh, read 2 Maccabees 3, 20 through 34. That's a good chunk, bro. Hold on. That's a good chunk. 2 Maccabees 3. What is in this chapter that I need to pay attention to? Help me out as I'm going to... Okay, you can skim. I'm just curious. 20 through 34. I don't want to spend too long reading, but let's go quick, ladies and gentlemen. Forgive me for reading fast, but I want to read it so that we can cover what Bakken is bringing to the table. All right. All right. Heliodorus went on with his plan. Are we at the right one? 320. 20. Okay, here we go. All of them with their hands raised toward heaven, making supplication. It was pitiful to see the populace prostrate everywhere and the high prostrate everywhere, and the high priest full of dread and anguish, while they were imploring the Almighty Lord to keep the deposit safe and secure for those who had placed them in trust. Heliodorus went on with this plan, but God protects the temple. But just as Heliodorus was arriving at the treasury with his bodyguards, the Lord of Spirits and all authority produced an apparition so great that those who had been bold enough to accompany Heliodorus were panic-stricken at God's power and fainted away in terror. So that sounds kind of like what we're getting in Acts, right? I think that's what Bakken's getting at, is that you have this like people who are there with Heliodorus, something supernatural is happening here, and it's shocking, causing panic for these people. There appeared to them a richly how do you pronounce it? Caparized horse? Comparisoned horse? Comparisoned? Let me see. How do you pronounce that? Pronounce this. I want to get it right. Caparisoned. Okay, yeah. So I got that right. Caparisoned horse, mounted by a fearsome rider, charging furiously, the horse attacked Heliodorus with its front hooves. The rider was seen wearing golden armor. Then two other young men, remarkably strong, strikingly handsome, and splendid attire, appeared before them. So that's interesting too. You got two young men, probably angels. Often you hear about young men in splendid attire often being angels, standing on each side of them. And by the way, the beginning of Acts has that. Standing on each side of them, they flogged him unceasingly, inflicting innumerable blows. Suddenly he fell to the ground, enveloped in great darkness. His men picked him up and laid him on a stretcher. They carried him away helpless. The man who a moment before had entered that treasury under arms with a great retinue and his whole bodyguard, they clearly recognized the sovereign power of God. As Heliodorus lay speechless because of God's action and deprived of any hope of recovery, the people praised the Lord, who had marvelously glorified his own place, and the temple charged so shortly before with fear and commotion was filled with joy and gladness now that the Almighty Lord had appeared. Quickly, some of the companions of Heliodorus begged Onias to call upon the Most High to spare the life of one who was about to breathe his last. Did I read the last one? Okay, 2 more verses. The high priest, suspecting that the king might think that Heliodorus had suffered some foul play at the hands of the Jews, offered a sacrifice for the man's recovery. While the high priest was offering the sacrifice of atonement, the same young men dressed in the same clothing again appeared and stood before Heliodorus. Be very grateful to the high priest Onias, they told him. It is for his sake that the Lord has spared your life. Since you have been scourged by heaven, proclaim to all God's great power. When they had said this, they disappeared. I believe I heard Bob Price once told me that this imitates... There's like an imitation that could be parallel between this exact text you're talking about and 2nd Maccabees and the book of Acts. So good observation, Bakken. I think there's something to be said there, even if you didn't think it was borrowing it or imitating it. It is definitely sharing a similar theme, trope, right? Very much in common. Good observation. Good observation. Oh, we got another super chat. Plastack. Thank you so much for being a member and dropping a 20 bomb on us. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. Isn't this just an allegorical story designed to describe arcane to the collective public imagination? The reality would sound banal to a pedestrian, but it is probable that it may refer to historical reality. Allegorical story designed to describe arcane to a collective public imagination. I mean, I think when we're talking about, are you talking about just all of it? Like the Gospels, Acts, I would say you're dealing with a historical fiction or a fictional history in a sense, where they are trying to depict some kind of legendary tale about a character they believe is the Messiah. And they're writing pretty fantastic material around it. I mean, I would look at other fictions, other people where they make heroic births and stories about them and deaths, and they're not dead when they die. They come back, or they're still alive in some way in heaven. They can communicate. Apollonius of Tyana does that. In fact, he had a doubting disciple that his doubt was overcome because Apollonius appears to him and, proves to him that he's not. I guess that he did go to heaven and ascend or whatever. So I'm not sure what to make of the allegorical story designed to describe arcane to the collective public imagination. I'm just giving you what I think the Gospels are doing. I also think they're doing a lot of things at once. They're also trying to deal with the black hole of the temple's demise. Why Christianity? Why you should believe in Christianity. It's trying to paint the Jews in a negative light in this text. The reality would sound banal to a pedestrian, but it is probable that it may refer to historical reality. I mean, look, I'm not buying the historical reality part, because if you do buy the historical reality part of this, I think we need to apply that to all other figures who have these similar claims about them. And what do you do when you do that? You open up a huge window of other gods and other people who are claiming them. Now, if you want to say there's just a universal principle and it's working through all humans, and that once in a while miracles happen, but it doesn't matter what name you call or what theology you hold to or whatever, okay, at least you're being consistent with miraculous claims and stories about births and stuff, if you really buy that. I just think humans love to tell tales. They love to have fictions. Lucian actually says a lot of this in his writing in the 2nd century. Lucian of Samosata says, men prefer the fable. They prefer the fabulous over the truth or the reality, the actual facts. And anyway, that's my personal thoughts on that. I think that there's a mixture of history in here, at least historical setting, historical people. Luke Acts is borrowing from a historian, Josephus. So I hope I answered your question, Plastak. I really feel like I probably butchered it, not really knowing how to answer the allegorical stuff. There is a guy who tries to argue that the Gospel of Mark is kind of an allegorical. It's a fictional allegory that is acting like history, but it's not history, about the zodiac, and that the disciples are going through the various houses of the zodiac, and Christ is the sun. So I don't know what to make of this. One of the Aquarius symbols that he goes through is that a man is carrying a big thing of water. When, from my understanding in the book I read, this is back 8-9 years ago, so I'm forgetting a lot. And I wish I had his name off the top of my head. Bill Darlison. Bill Darlison is his name. Bill Darlison. Jesus Zodiac. I'm just Google. Let's see if this helped me. Bill Darlison. Yeah, Bill Darlison. Jesus was never a historical figure. Instead, Darlison argues that the Gospels are allegorical text designed as an esoteric guide where Jesus serves as an astrological representation of the zodiac, specifically reflecting the age of Pisces. This is his book, Gospel and the Zodiac, The Secret Truth About Jesus. And yeah, so that's his take. If you're interested, there's a shameless plug on an allegorical approach. Great guy, by the way. I've interviewed him, but it was a long time ago. Holy frickin' smokes. Look how expensive that is. That's all right. There's a paperback, or you can get it on Kindle for $2.99. I'm not going to tell you which one you should probably get if you're going to buy this book. $2.99. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, figure I'd give him a plug. Oh, I didn't show the dang book. Here's the book. The Secret Truth About Jesus, The Gospel and the Zodiac, Bill Darlison. Great guy. $2.99, $350 brand new. That's why I said you probably want to go with Kindle. And yeah, check that out. Plastak, thank you so much for the super chat. I hope that helped. If you've never come across him, at least you now know about him. Oh, you got another one. What is too arcane for the public imagination to understand? I meant to say. I mean, again, I don't really know. Yeah, thank you for catching that. I really don't know what to say about this. I mean, I'm not really sure what you're getting at ultimately. What would be too difficult? Because are you getting at the parables that Jesus is saying, like some of the sayings and teachings? He doesn't want people to understand. So I'm not really sure I'm getting where you're coming from with the super chat. Forgive me for misunderstanding here, but I really don't understand. Plastic, I'm looking. I'm trying to see what you got to follow up. If you write a comment, I'll pay attention to your comment. Thank you for the super chats. I really appreciate it. Let me go back to Bart. I'll be looking out for you. I'll stop and see what you have to say. All right, we're going to wrap Bart up here. I'm trying, ladies and gentlemen.
60 years later, who have heard stories in circulation who are living in different parts of the world, who weren't eyewitnesses, who didn't interview eyewitnesses. And so that's the evidence we got. We don't know if there's an empty tomb. It seems unlikely. And we have one eyewitness who's talking about something happened 2 decades before.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite a lot of historical problems, or a lot of problems for understanding this as an historical event.
Well, it's the big problem is you can't prove it. You can't prove that God intervened in history because you don't have, as a historian, you don't have access to God. And you only have access to things that happened on the ground in the natural world. And you could argue there was an empty tomb, although I think you're hard-pressed to do that, but you could argue that. I think you can certainly argue that there are people who claim to see Jesus later. Paul says he did, and Paul says that other people did. And so he heard that other people did. So he himself has heard, possibly from Cephas himself or James himself, possibly. And so that's the material we could talk about historically. All of that material is problematic for showing that Jesus was raised from the dead. Let me put this in a different way, other than just saying, well, historians can't talk about miracles. If historians can only establish the likelihood of something happening in the past, what you do is you collect all the data that you can be sure about. People said there was an empty tomb. People said they saw Jesus. Christianity did start, things like that. You collect all that, and then you try and figure out what are the plausible explanations for it. And so just with the appearances of Jesus, is it possible that people saw somebody they thought was Jesus, but was not Jesus? They looked like Jesus, or they were just convinced was Jesus. They didn't get a close-up view. Is that possible? And then they said, oh, I saw Jesus. Is that possible? Is it possible that disciples stole the body? Is it possible? Is it possible that that Romans moved the body and didn't bother to tell anybody, and later Christians went to where he was buried and found it? Is that possible? Is it possible that there was deceit? Is it possible there were mistakes made? Is any of that possible?
I love that he brings in deceit and mistakes. I mean, like, let's keep it real. If you were looking at other cults, do you honestly just trust and believe what they say? And we can bring up a ton, and we find a lot of deception and a lot of problems all the time in other movements. Why do we pretend this one isn't fraught with them? I mean, when Paul writes his letters to a church where people are sleeping with their dad's wife and they're suing each other and divorce, like they're struggling, like it doesn't seem like they're copacetic like you would imagine the Holy Spirit would help them not be. No, they're clearly as human as all of us and make all the same failures that other cults make too.
And you say, well, look, it's not likely the disciples stole the body. That's not likely. Why would they? No. Yes, that's right. It's not likely. None of these explanations is likely. Do these things ever happen? Do people ever lie? Do people ever start religions on false premises? Do people see someone that they think is someone other than who it is? Are there mistaken identities that happen? Do people have hallucinations? Do people have dreams that they interpret as things that really happen? These things happen all the time. They happen thousands of times every day. So if the historian wants to show what probably happened, and the choice is things that happen thousands of times every day versus something that's never happened before, which is more likely? And so again, I'm not saying you can disprove the resurrection. I'm saying if it happened, it's a miracle and you can believe it religiously. You can't show it historically. And if you're just looking at historical grounds, it's not the most likely explanation. It can't be.
Yeah.
I think that is an excellent place to end the conversation.
That ends it. And then he gets like a 3-question thing I'm not going to do. So I'm going to come back to you. But yeah, there's a lot here. So the whole conversation, people mistake one person for another. You have that. Grieving people see their dead loved ones, for example. That is documented across every culture. People have powerful dreams. People double down when hope collapses. People start movements on a sincere mistake. All of that happens thousands of times a day, and we can verify it. A corpse reanimated by God has exactly what they would argue one alleged instance ever in this case. They would maybe allow for, obviously, the resurrections Jesus performs, Elijah and Elisha performs, the bones of Ezekiel that brings someone back from the dead. They might allow that. But yeah, they won't allow Heracles or Asclepius healing miracles of raising people from the dead, or anyone else that's ever done such a miracle that claims to have done these things. They don't allow that typically. That's a problem in my view as well. The historian is asking what probably happened, cannot choose the one of a kind miracle over the everyday human pattern. That's the historian. All right. That's not bias. It's literally what the word is, what it means. History. When you're doing history, you're not going to be able to prove those things. Period. It's a faith thing. It takes a leap. You got to take a leap from there. He covered a lot of material in this video that I thought was great, interesting, because there's different paths you can go down, and there's no way to know. There's no way to know for sure, right, what seemed to be the case. And I think doubt is a very comfortable place I live in today. Obviously, I don't have any fear of this being wrong. I don't need to defend, a thing I already believe in. I don't have to. And I would do this to any and all religions. Ramada said, flesh and blood is an idiom. That's something that you just recently saw in a debate with Alex O'Connor and Trent Horn. Trent Horn's trying to get out of the problem. He knows the problem. He knows that flesh and blood, flesh and bone does not inherit the kingdom of God. Flesh and bones and Luke. Is that an idiom? I guess it must be an idiom as well. Mr. Anderson, thank you so much. Keep on doing great work. God bless. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Appreciate the love and support, my friend. Yeah, you've been nothing but help. I really appreciate you. Seriously. Yeah, I think more and more people, as they evaluate this stuff and they don't have, strong, defenses about it, we'll see what seems to be the obvious. And in fact, I have a friend, Caleb Jackson, Christian apologist. We've talked for hours on the phone. I mean, over the years, just hours and hours and hours. And he said to me, Derek, I know that no ancient text like the Bible, the letters, the Gospels is convincing to skeptics. I recognize that. I'm not a fool who keeps the fool's errand on trying to use these materials from these ancient stories to persuade you. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen with any of the skeptics. That's why he said, that's why I work on modern miracles. The best thing he knows how to do is to try and look for modern examples of miracles that are still happening. And that's it. The old ancient texts that we're finding, all these problems are fraught with contradictions and issues that we find. It isn't convincing to someone who studies this in depth. It just isn't. It's not persuasive. Just like you reading the Quran would not bat your eye, Mr. Christian, who might watch, you don't read that and go, whoa, hold on, man. Maybe Muhammad might be, bro, I was reading it and it pulled me in. I think he might be the prophet. And I hear a lot of Muslims say, just read the Quran and it'll open your eyes and you'll be like, it'll be the truth. I don't know look, maybe someone who's really struggling, just like a drug addict who's struggling, who needs Jesus, and then Jesus saves them from addiction, which I think is doing other things in the brain. That might be the only time you're going to catch people do that. I don't think people pick up the Quran and just go, oh, this is so true. Wow, it's so persuasive. No. And I don't think the same is true for Christianity in terms of the Gospels or the New Testament. But yeah, Mr. Anderson, I really do appreciate it. And I know that you've taken a lot of interest in looking at Paul. Look at Paul's own letters. Paul, talking to the churches, is constantly saying, I am an apostle. Someone is saying he's not. People are clearly not convinced of his apostleship. And he wasn't one of the original. And as Bart Ehrman said in this video, that I think was a great point, is even if something appeared to him, how would he know it's really Jesus? Did they have a portrait hanging up in Jerusalem when Paul went to visit? He goes, no, that's the guy. Yeah, Peter, the picture you have on the wall of Jesus, that's the guy I saw. Even then, do you trust him? I don't know. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate it. Let's see. Anyone else in here? Witchmaster, good to see. Doc, thanks for being here. Where was my buddy who dropped a comment? I was planning on. Oh, there he is. Plastac says the masses, the throngs that are coming to Jesus, do so without the ability to understand sophisticated theological concepts. The ideas must be sold to them. Yeah, so that's what I thought you were getting at, is like Jesus is teaching in parables. It sounds like in one of the Gospels he's doing it so they don't understand. In another Gospel, maybe he's doing it so they do understand. It depends on like where you're reading this from. But are these tales, fictional stories to help convey some deeper truths, some theological points? Some people think so. Sometimes it might just be a story trying to give a little clout to a guy named Jesus, to make him seem great, to give him authority and power because they're already part of the cult. Some of it might just be teaching some hidden wisdom, some truths that they think they're wanting to convey through narrative form. Look at the stories that we watch or read. We watch in terms of fictions. I'll watch Lord of the Rings, or I'll watch Game of Thrones. I'll see bad, I see good. And there's a lot of teaching. There's a lot of lessons that we learned in something that is clearly not literal, even though it's fantastic. It's some kind of fiction. And I don't know where to pin that down as far as your super chat earlier was concerned. But yeah, I think that some people think that the early cult of Christianity had an inner circle that understood at a deeper level, and that the surface reading, the literal reading of the text, was for those who aren't initiated on that level. They don't understand to get behind the literal face value of the material. And it was kind of operating in the same way you would imagine a mystery religion would operate in some sense. That could be the case as well. Those who have the gnosis might know. John doesn't call him an apostle, right? There's a lot of problems. Sounds like Paul protesteth too mucheth. Yes, indeed. All right, look, everybody smash the freaking like button, please. I want to do more Bart Ehrman stuff. He's fun. He's fun to listen to. I'm an affiliate of his courses as well. We also have courses. If you're interested in academic courses, mvp-courses.com. You should definitely get locked in and take this stuff and take your learning to the next level. Share this out there. Hype the video. I hear hyping videos helps get it more attention. I could use all the hype I can get here at MythVision. Like it, share it, comment down below after the stream. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all the super chats, compliments, non-compliments, critiques, jabs, the hates, the loves, all of it. Until next time, I can't wait to see you. Never forget, we are MythVision.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.